repeating that bullshit that you've been told, and you need that info. Sonetta TV, Sonetta TV. Tune in to consciousness and watch the lies fold, then you can let the truth flow. On Sonetta TV, Sonetta TV. When you feel that melanin about to explode, like you feel the wind blow, it's Sonetta TV, Sonetta TV. I know you got the truth, but you can get more, so you continue to grow. Sonetta TV, Sonetta TV.
Yeah. Y'all already know what it is. Peace and blessings to everybody in the building so far. Man, this is going to be a great one, a great show tonight. We got Elder Yarah in the building, a formidable Israelite, a brother who been doing facts, research, studying, who have been doing this for years. And we got the author, Edward Dodge, up in the building. Hold that book up one more time, Mr. Edward Dodge. Let the people see this. Let the people see this, man. There it is right there. There it is right there. All right. That right there, man. Awesome. So we're going to have not a debate, y'all, but this is like a weigh-in leading up to. Let's see if it's worthy of a debate between these two gentlemen right here. You know what I'm saying? Between these two gentlemen right here, we're going to see if this is going to lead up to a debate, which I think it is. Elder Yarah is definitely a formidable opponent that comes in, and he knows his stuff when it comes to that Bible. And so without any further ado, I would like to bring on Elder Yarah and talk about what the topic is today, brother. Let's get it in. Hit that like, share, and everything else in that button, y'all. Hit the like button. Thumb it up. Let's go, Elder Yarah.
Hey, peace and blessings. Give it all praise to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Shout out to Elder Sonetta, man, for bringing this together, bringing us some great topics as he always does. Some interesting people that he brings together to have intellectual conversations and discourse. And to Edward Dodge, I appreciate you for coming on and having discourse with myself and something we can share with the people. I think it will be edifying and a learning experience. And so I'm excited. As far as the topic is concerned, I was a little bit interested in showing the actual continuity in showing that El in Yahweh actually is one and the same deity, even in the scripture. I know there's been some contesting that particular notion to a degree, and I think that's sort of, if I'm understanding Dodge's Edward's position on that, he has a little bit of different take on it, and so I just wanted to talk about that and not get too in depth of what I have available to support my position, but just to have an overall brief conversation and just see where it leads. So I'm excited to have this conversation, and I appreciate him for being here.
All right. Thank you, brother. And I want Edward Dodge to come on in and introduce himself and open up with the topic. Let's talk about it. Edward Dodge, you got the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Sonetta. Thank you so much for having me back. And Yarah, it's great to make your acquaintance. We chatted once before, and I really appreciate the chance to speak with you. I think we'll have I'm just here for a friendly conversation. It's not about a debate. It's about informing each other with facts. And, I'm not trying to argue about anything old. I'm trying to argue for something new. So I'm just here to let's find points of agreement. I'm not here to disabuse anyone of their personal spiritual beliefs. I'm here to work on, what the archaeologists and the new information and trying to make sense of some of the new information we've got that's come out in recent years. And so I'm here for a friendly conversation tonight. Neither one of us brought any presentations or any materials, so we're just going to chat, and then hopefully, if it's interesting, we'll set up a night for a couple of weeks from now when we can bring slide decks and some material to support our position.
All right. Now I want to also say, Edwards, that do not hesitate if you disagree, because I'm gonna tell you, Elder Yarah will not hesitate. He knows that he is in the toughest environment, and there's thousands of people that's going to be watching. So you want to be right and precise. And if you disagree, feel free to disagree. We don't have no baby skin over here. We got tough skin.
I'm gonna make the case. I'm gonna make the case that the Israelites were polytheistic all the way through the first temple, and that that they got Asherah, the mother goddess. That El and Yahweh definitely start as two separate gods, and we can debate about what point they start coming together in the eyes of the Yahwehs. But not everybody's a Yahweh, so the rest of the community still sees El as a separate god. That's my position, and that runs all the way through until the exile to Babylon.
Okay, now, do I need to put up a time with you, brothers? Do I need to put up a time?
Like a date?
No, I'm talking about a clock, so that y'all both can get equal time, or y'all will respect each other's time. Let me know.
I'm happy to be respectful.
Okay, there you go. Elder Yarah, you know his position. Speak on it.
I don't really want to state the brother's position for him, but I'll just state my own. I think that's fair enough.
Go ahead.
That throughout the scriptures that we see from the beginning of the book of Genesis, all the way to the book of, I would say, through all the way to what we see attested in the Tanakh or the Hebrew Bible, I would say that we clearly see that there is a continuity between the deity known as El. Some say the Canaanite deity, but I have some contestations with that as well. Speaking specifically the Canaanite tribes versus the tribe of Israel, we clearly see distinctions made from that perspective. But I do see, again, continuity. Again, if we go into the book of Genesis, we began the second chapter. If we're going with what the Yahwehs is, and we're talking about the Doctrine hypothesis, what the Yahwehs would say, we clearly see connections in the book of Genesis. We see Yale mentioned along with Yahweh, specifically when we're talking about the book of Genesis, chapters verses 18 and 19, leading up into the Sodom and Gomorrah story. We do see Yahweh El. We see Abraham as well, as he's taken Isaac up into the mountain. He talks about El Shaddai, right? Or the God is more than enough, or some would say the full-breasted one, right? If you're talking about more closer to the Canaanite understanding, right? But what we see is that this, if we're stating that Yahweh has had a much more influence early on, specifically, or later than the book of Genesis, we shouldn't see both these usages. We should either see El being used for a period of time, and then completely we should see Yahweh. But we see them both being used before Exodus, specifically chapter 6, when Moses has just a brief conversation or dialogue, I should say, with Ruel or Jethro, right? And in the inferences of the name of Ruel, we see El mentioned there in his name. So with that, I think that there's a lot of things in there that we can clearly show continuity. I know some will bring out the scripture where it talks about Yahweh, El giving Yahweh his portion, right? And the Israelites, their territory. I know that's a lot of people try to hang their marker to show distinction between the two, a complete separation. But I see continuity there. I see them recognizing Yahweh as El, specifically El Elyon, right? Or the Most High. And so with that, I think that's sort of the basis that I have. And I think that's really, I think that's really enough to get a conversation with, and then I'll be able to.
I mean, that's terrific. And I agree with you. You do see El and Yahweh. You see Abraham talking to Yahweh, right? And so, and we clearly see in that section of the story, Yahweh is appearing in the text. question is, who wrote those stories down and when? Because my position is that there are oral traditions that go back to the Bronze Age about Abraham and Sarah. And I actually have a whole thing I do about why I believe, not to say that they are necessarily historical figures, but just that these are very, very old stories that go to the predate the Exodus, that legitimately go back to the second millennium BC and the Bronze Age. And specifically, I get into the marital relationships between Abraham and Sarah. I get into the marital relationships of Jacob with Rachel and Leah, to make the case that there's a transition from patriarchy to matriarchy across the entire ancient Near East, and that matriarchal families and patriarchal families were living side by side in the second millennium BC, and that there's a transition from the older matriarchal structures to a later patriarchal structure, and that we're seeing vestiges of it in the older stories. My position is that, all right, so first of all, let's just mention Jacob. First of all, he gets the name Israel. The first thing he does after that whole story with the wrestling with the angel or wrestling with whoever, the first thing he does is go to the town of Bethel, which means house of El, which was an existing town. I think we know that that was an existing place. And he builds an altar, and on the altar he writes the words. In English, it says God is the God of Israel, but in Hebrew, it says El Eloi Israel. El is the God of Israel. And notice in the name Israel, it's Israel, not Israel. And so scholars have long pointed that out, that originally when that name first came about, they were clearly following El. If they were following Yahweh, it would have been called Israel or something else, Israel, something to that effect. So in the fact is he writes the words El is the God of Israel is pretty clear that they're talking about El, at least at that stage. Now, I would argue that the stories, by the time when they're written down and we see them written down, it's in, it's centuries later, and it's being written down by Yahweh. So they're taking older stories and putting Yahweh back into it. Specifically, you mentioned Abraham and Isaac and the sacrifice. This is a key story for me. This is actually a key detail. The Greeks and the Hebrews, they talk about El. They talk about the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians worshiping El, who they describe as Kronos. And they talk about child sacrifice in the Carthaginian community and how they sacrificed babies to El. And there's a whole bunch of stuff about that. My position is that part of the Reformation that the Yahwists were doing was ending child sacrifice. That this is part of the culture where they're fighting, is they want to bring these traditions to an end, and that they succeed. And so what you see in that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob story, or Abraham and Jacob Isaac story of the sacrifice, is that if you read the text closely, it's El or Elohim that demands the sacrifice. And Yahweh does not actually enter the story. The name Yahweh does not enter the story until he's relieved with the I'm missing the word, where they take him off the altar and replace him with the ram. When they find the ram in the bush, that's Yahweh that provides the deliverance. El demands a sacrifice. Yahweh provides the deliverance. That's my interpretation, and that's where I think they're introducing Yahweh into that story as part of this Reformation, and it serves a double purpose. It makes it, because it's confusing to people, because they see El demanding, they see God, right? If you just read it as one God, it's very confusing. God both demands a sacrifice and then gives a deliverance from the sacrifice. This has always been very controversial among believers for a very long time. Like, why would God demand the sacrifice? I actually think that the historical piece is that they really did sacrifice babies in that era, and that there was a Reformation and they stopped sacrificing babies. And that was part of what the Yahwists were doing, was in overhauling these traditions and rebooting El, so to speak, taking an old version of the high God that had been corrupted, so to speak. If you read the Ugaritic text, El is like a drunken buffoon. And I think that, and he's deferential to all these goddesses. That's the other big part of my argument, is that they need to get rid of the goddesses because these goddesses are not submissive. El lets these goddesses run all over him. And so they want to reboot the high God, make him more patriarchal, more powerful, get rid of the parts they don't like, keep the parts they do like, and reboot them. That's my argument.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I do appreciate the way you've you sort of synchronized the two to sort of the sort of two ideas to really bring out your point there.
You're muted. You got muted, Yarah.
Okay, my apologies. Yeah, so I appreciate the way you've laid that out to a degree where we can sort of follow clearly how you come about the distinction of El and Yahweh, and it seems like it's really based on child sacrifice and maybe the Reformation
and the treatment of the goddesses. Those are the two things. Yep.
And the treatment, and the treatment of the goddesses, and that's even more telling because as we clearly see, I don't argue against the fact that Israel did at some point worship Asherah. We clearly have attestations of that in the scriptures that they did worship Asherah, but we do see as a part of Josiah's reform. I don't know if you're familiar with King Josiah.
Oh, yeah, sure.
As part of Josiah's reform, we clearly see him basically saying that part of his reform is that he's going to go back to the older times, back to his forefathers, beyond where his fathers were when they were evil before he came into power and claimed the throne, where they did evil things, quote unquote. One of those things, bringing the Asherah pole into the temple and that being worshiped, that he was going to go back to the older worship, to where they first began worship of what we call Yahweh. And with that being said, that tells me that there is some semblance of Yah only worship. Now, I do agree with you to the fact that they did believe in more than one God. I would call them henotheists, that they had a belief in more than one God, but there is one supreme God and one God that they attested to. Oh,
you got muted again, buddy.
I'm sorry. Let me move that already. I do believe that they were henotheists. And before we get to their understanding of henotheism, where they believed in one supreme deity, but there were other smaller deities around them in places that they land and people that they deal with that they did believe in. But before we get to that particular point where we can show the henotheism, I believe that belief system itself kind of cuts the argument that they actually worshiped two gods in the Bible, even in a parallel sense or just merging of the two. I believe that there's a continuity there, that they've had to have found some type of correlation or understanding that this is the same deity. And I think that even going back, you brought up the time of those in the Ugaritic text we found in certain Ugaritic texts.
Yeah, can I ask you about that? What's your opinion of the Ugaritic texts, and how do you feel that they correlate to the Bible? Because this is a point of contention among folks.
Well, I believe that with the Ugaritic text in the Bible, what you see is coming down through, I would say, not so much as the Sumerians, but more the Akkadians. You would see influence of Akkadian. There's a study that just came out, a linguistic study that just came out, I think about maybe 2 or 3 months ago, where they clearly show a connection between the ancient Akkadian language connected to what we would call Paleo-Hebrew and some modern-day Hebrew today, right? And so because of that, we could almost follow the continuity of understanding. So I think that when we see things of deities by the name of Ilyu or Alilu, right, as some people would say it. If I'm not pronouncing that right, I'll spell it for you. It's I-L-U. We see that early on in some Ugaritic writings, right? And then we have some connections with that, with a more distinct term of Yahu, Y-A-H-U, right? And so we do see that in some of the name of the prophets in the Bible, like Eliyahu. We see that in the scripture. And so I do think we see a connection from that type of Ugaritic language to the naming of the same deity, which we know also has a connection of with El. And I just won't throw these things out. We can get into it a little bit depth.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I mean, I agree with all that. That's all. I'm fine with all that. I would say my opinion on the Ugaritic text is that they are the prequel to the Bible, if you will, and that this was the existing Canaanite religion that the Yahwists overthrew. that Baal was he was the incumbent king of the gods, if you will, and or like he was the incumbent king of the gods, and Yahweh it's a coup. They overthrow Baal, and so when they're fighting on the Battle of Mount Carmel, I actually think that's a historical event in like 850 around BC that they really were having this dispute. They're trying to knock out Baal and to replace him with Yahweh, to make Yahweh the new king of the gods. But Yahweh is not El if he's fighting with Baal in 850 BC. Like he's only gotten to the level of Baal. He's gotten to the level of Baal's father. El is Baal's father. So at 850 BC, they're still fighting between Yahweh and Baal over who's going to be in charge. And and Baal represents these older traditions that the Yahwehs do eventually overthrow. That they do, and at least a portion of them are successful.
Yeah, I do believe I agree with you. I do believe there was an actual event that occurred in 850 BC. But here's one of the things that I noticed as well in my research. Right, by the time we get to about I would say 720 or so BCE, maybe just about 100 years. Yeah, just about 100 years or so later. Right, we clearly see that when the Assyrians come in, right. The Assyrians wage war. They begin a campaign on what we would consider Jerusalem, right? They're looking
sure. Under Hezekiah.
Under Hezekiah, absolutely. So by that time, but what we see is that there's a major revolt that occurs before we get to Hezekiah, and it's led by who I believe, quote unquote, is an Israelite by the name of Yahu or Yahweh or Yahu.
Oh yeah, Jehu. Yeah, the one who kills Jezebel.
The one who kills Jezebel, absolutely. But there's other variations that we know in certain texts. There's other variations of his name, and one of the variations of his name is that Yahweh or that Yahu at the beginning is spelled out Ilu, I-L-U, which takes us all the way back to that further Ugaritic understanding that we find that name in some other Ugaritic understandings of the meaning of the Most High or the Lord. And then we still have some connections with that term, I-L-U, to the term of El. And so this is why I see, even by in
well, I'm not familiar with the ILU argument at all. So that's new to me.
Yeah. So this is
but I agree. Jehu is a Yahwist. Jehu is definitely Yahwist, the Jehu name, and he is a Yahweh name for sure.
Yeah. And so this is one of the that's one of the points that I would definitely like to have a further discussion with that understanding that we still see this continuity of these different names for El, for Yahweh, right? We have Yahweh, Yahu, Yah-O. We see these things at different times. Now, some people can attribute them to different tribes with different dialects. Things will be pronounced differently, but I still think the same ideology and understanding of who these deities were still stands firm. And so I think just continuity is there throughout.
Can we skip just like a little bit of background and like where we like frame things up? Just
sure.
Where do you think the timing of the Exodus? Let's just start there. I assume you imagine that you take that there was an Exodus. What's your take on the Exodus and in what century it happened in?
Me personally, I believe the Exodus occurred 1446 BCE. I understand where most scholars lie around the 12th century, right? Around the time of the Moneta Stele, we can get around those particular times and dates. But I usually put it at 1446 BCE, where I do see that chronologically speaking, we can show some parallels between being what's written in the Moneta Stele in 1446 BCE, as far as some of the occurrences and different things. But we do see, in regards to Moneta Stele, if we had 1240, even if we're talking about circa 1250 or whatever BCE, we still see some attestations of where people are still arguing whether or not it says Israel. I think on line 27 where it says
Israel. I'll go in later than the scholars. I think the Moneta Stele is the Exodus. I think that's Pharaoh saying, we got rid of those pesky guys. You'll never hear from them again. And the Song of the Sea is referring to the same event. It's saying we barely escaped by the skin of our teeth, and like, blessed Yahweh, we escaped into the desert. I think that's two sides of the same story, and it's 1209 BC, and that the dating works. So that's how that's. And I'll like pay everything on the timeline when I have my slide deck, but
Sure.
that's dating I'm going to use.
Okay. In our argument with the, in my argument, again, like I said, I placed it at 1446 BCE,
which is the traditional view. That's the Orthodox.
Yeah, it's the traditional view, and so I sort of hold to that. Just let me not jumping points, but let's just going back to showing the continuity in the background of Yahweh, right, or Yahu, right? We have attestations of Ramses, I believe the second, or two attestations of Ramses the second, and then earlier on Amenhotep.
Can I ask you another question?
Yes, absolutely.
The connection to Akhenaten and the Akhenaten cultivaten to the Yahwehs, and with your dating especially, because he's after that. He's like 1350, right? So I would imagine you probably sync them up tighter.
Well, I do think that between Akhenaten and the monotheistic view that is always attributed to him, I do think that we start to see a more understanding of, I would say, an evolution of just of how people are viewing themselves in nature, right, or how they're viewing nature at the time. So I do think, versus all of the natural disasters and wars that they've gone through, the battles, and then the influx of other people that are now in the area at that time as it once before. So you have a sort of this synchronization of different ideas and ideologies, and so I think that leads to more so of Akhenaten's understanding of monotheism. Right, he still holds Re or Ra as the one true God, right? To a degree, and then there's actually a quote that comes centuries later that clearly says to the degree that Yahweh, Yahweh is the sacred name of Ra. To that degree, it's the sacred name of Ra.
Do we have a name? Do we have a quote of that?
Yeah, I'm gonna show that. I'm gonna show
that
you
one.
Yeah, but it comes later.
Because I do think that the Yahweh movement is clearly downstream of Akhenaten. I just couldn't say a specific connection, but I think it's clearly downstream. There must have been some memory that at least informed that movement. I have to believe that. Like it's hard to say that there's no connection there.
Yeah.
Hold on. It was when you say it's like downstream to Akhenaten, what do you mean when you're saying that?
Like intellectually, that the idea of one religion, and we're going to shut down all these other temples, and we're going to forcibly shut them down and make everybody come into one temple, which is what they do with Hezekiah and Josiah. It's a centralization. That's one of the reforms, is they're centralizing and forcing everybody to come worship one God. I mean, there's an element of like political coercion, but there's also an intellectual, theological argument. And we don't have any other examples of it happening, well, at least not many. So that's an idea that's out there that people are thinking, this is a good idea. There's a thing we can do. We can shut down all the country altars and have just one centralized altar, one centralized, authoritarian religion like that. And not even authoritarian in a bad way, but just like one central point, focal point, right? That's clearly an idea in common. And some people argue a very tight connection that, like Moses comes right out of, I mean, I don't know. I don't make those kinds of arguments, but some people will try to make a very specifically, this guy is that guy kind of argument with the Bible and Akhenaten's court. I don't make that argument, but I do think that the idea can be out there, and over generations without anyone necessarily writing it down, the idea bubbles back to the surface later on.
Let me ask you, Elder Yarah, how long have Moses studied in Egypt and been in Egypt?
Well, according to the text, it would have been about 40 years.
40 years, correct. Would it be fair to say, and I'm asking both of you this question, and I want you to go first, Elder Yarah. Would it be fair to say that Moses had to take what he had learned and brought it to Israel? Let's say the Leviticus priesthood, for example. the washing, the eating proper food. Would it be fair to say that Moses took those teachings with him when he left?
This is what I clearly read in the scripture, right? That there's a passage of scripture just that clearly states that Yahweh clearly commands the Israelites not to do as the Egyptians do. That itself, to me, speaks more towards the ritualistic practices, right? But now, if you ask me, do I think Moses learned how to scout for the enemy, how to scout out new territory, what land was best for them to survive in throughout their wilderness experience, what food should they not have eaten during that particular time? I think he clearly could have gotten that. He could have gotten that from Egypt. But also, along with that 40 years, it tells us that he also spent 40 years on the backside of the desert, right? Which is where he meets Midian, or his father-in-law, which is we call Jethro. And it is at that time, we clearly know now that Moses is clearly aware of who El is, right? And so because Jethro, also his name is Ruel. And if you study the Midianites, you'll clearly see they have a long history that connects back to and I think I brought this up before. Where most people refer to it as the Quinite or the Kenizzite hypothesis, right? Where El was their major deity, and so I do see there's clear influence there, but we clearly see Ruel and Moses clearly working together. Ruel as a priest, I don't think that he would have accepted any other deity, excuse me, as a main deity or consort to El, or someone as equal to El as he did with Moses. So I clearly see they must have found some type of synchronization or some type of agreement there.
I agree with all that. And I think that just real quickly, I think that obviously there's loads of Egyptian influence all over the Israelites, and how much of it Moses personally brought in or was just there in general. I think there's just so much Egyptian influence you'd be crazy to try and deny it. So I think there's loads of Egyptian all over it. Question for you guys: where do you all stand on the Coptic beliefs of Moses being in Ethiopia and sort of Coptic Christian beliefs that have Moses having a whole long sojourn in Ethiopia, that he was a general there, and that Zipporah is Ethiopian. A lot of them think the Midianites are Ethiopians. Where do you guys fall on all those positions? And do you guys get debates with the Coptics?
I don't. I'm very familiar with that story. That how Moses was taken in among the Coptics, among the Ethiopians, how he was set up as so much as almost like as a prince or a king among them. Yeah. He was a general that led them, and he had these fantastic military strategies.
I only learned these stories kind of recently from a Coptic friend of mine, and I was like, wow, I didn't know you guys had all these beliefs.
I'm familiar with that. We don't, in the Bible, we have nothing in the story other than his connection to Midian through Ruel. Right. That talks about that outside of Moses' wife. And here's another thing which I would have brought. I'll bring out later at a later date, but I think this makes interesting conversation. We clearly see that at some point in the scripture that now I am that I am, or Yahweh, after he's received his revelation from Yahweh, there's an instance where now it appears that Yahweh seeks to punish Moses for being disobedient. He's not doing something, and I believe it has something to do with the understanding of circumcision, right?
There's that great story.
Yeah, and so what happens is, to a degree, is that Moses' wife Zipporah, what she does is she performs the circumcision ritual, and then she throws up on their son, and she throws the bloody foreskin at Moses' feet. What that tells me, among anything else, is that Zipporah, who is clearly a Midianite, or some say Ethiopian or Cushitic to the degree, is aware of circumcision. That is a ritual practice that we know is involved with El at that point, because where would she have learned it? She would have learned it from her tribe of people. And so we still have this continuity of El still being recognized and ritual practice still being used, even though the scripture tells us that it's Yahweh who's seeking to destroy Moses. She's still performing the practices of El, of the deity that she's familiar with. And so this is where we can show, I think one instance where, we can show continuity, that these deities are yet one and the same. But I would love to have that conversation about
along the same lines. The story with Miriam, when Miriam gets when she argues with Moses and she gets punished, and she's blinded with, or not blinded, but like her skin is covered in leprosy.
Yes.
And Moses shouts out, "El, save her." Yes. And it's one of the lines where it doesn't even say El Shaddai, it doesn't say Elohim, it just says El.
It just says El.
And that's like one, and there's not that many spots where it only mentions El by himself with no other, qualifiers, like El Shaddai. But that's a line where Moses says El specifically. So I thought that's an interesting, because I'm not actually entirely sure what to make of it. I do think Miriam is important because when they throw her out and they bury her. So I don't know how much you know about my work. You want to step back? Let me finish that story first. They bury Miriam in the town of Kadesh. So Miriam basically is purged out of the story, like without much explanation. There's an argument about Moses' wife, who we assume is Zipporah, but doesn't actually say the name Zipporah. And Moses' wife doesn't utter any words in this argument, so we don't know what they're talking about. We don't know any of the circumstances of the argument. We just know there's a dispute. Miriam gets punished. Aaron does not get punished. Only Miriam gets. Aaron does all this stuff, and he always gets away with it. He makes the golden calf, gets away with it. He does this argument with Moses, he gets away with it. But Miriam, she gets punished, and basically we never see hear from her again. Only one last line, and she's a prophetess, right? And she's very important. She's a leader of the women. She's the one who saves Moses as a child, right? She is like a really important character. But the biblical writers just chunk her out of the story quite unceremoniously. And then the only time that she gets mentioned after that is she is buried in the city of Kadesh. Kadesh, the holy ones, the same city for the Kadesh priestesses. And Kadesh was one of the names that they used for Asherah. So I have a theory. That Miriam was a Kadesha, that she's one of these priestesses. She's a prophetess. And that in getting rid of those traditions, they celebrate Aaron because the Levirate priesthood comes from the line of Aaron. I believe it's Levites, right? Levite priesthood comes from the line of Aaron. So they think Aaron's great. So they're always going to dress Aaron up. But they get rid of the Kadesha. They get rid of the priestesses. And so Miriam, who would have been the poster child for the priestesses, chunk her out of the story, and bye-bye Miriam. And so that's how I see that. But to give you a little background, because I don't know how familiar you are with my work and how I got into all of this book. This book I wrote that I was, and I'm working on a follow-up to this book right now, and that's kind of what I'm hashing through my material on this, on this platform. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to work through my raw material. But my approach was all about the goddesses and trying to uncapture the. I was shocked when I learned about the scholar saying God had a wife, because I grew up going to church, and that just didn't make any sense to me at all. It hurt my brain to even think about God having a wife, because it just didn't make sense theologically. There's no space for the monotheistic God to have any, anything around him, right? So it took me a long time to try and suss that out. And that's when I kind of fell down this rabbit hole of exploring the goddess traditions and what was going on, because I really wanted to understand what was going on with Asherah. And it's actually three goddesses, Asherah, Astarte, and Anat, that are in. Only two are named. Anat's not named. We see her in the Ugaritic text. And my theory is that she is not named for a reason, because she's too powerful. She's too terrifying. She's like Kali behind us. She is the last. She is the mother goddess in her angry form, and she comes and wipes out all of creation. She is the most powerful piece on the chessboard. So you can't even name her. You can't even name her to get rid of her. The only thing you can do is ignore her, because YSRA'EL, they chop her down. Astarte, they insult her, call her Ashtoreth. The insult, which means shameful. So shameful Astarte. Why is she shameful? Because she's a sex goddess. So it's all slut shaming, right? Because she's a goddess of harlotry. Like literally, she's a harlot goddess. And so they got to get rid of her, because it teaches all your daughters very bad ideas. If you're trying to have a patriarchal society where you're trying to keep your daughters virgins, you can't have a harlot goddess running around encouraging your daughters to do exactly the opposite. And so that's part of this Reformation, is to get rid of these traditions that empower women, these old traditions that are probably at that point in history kind of long in the tooth and have become corrupted. Some of the institutions are corrupt. I'm perfectly willing to believe that their behaviors were deserving of a reformation. Just because they had goddesses doesn't mean that they were like good, honest, moral people. They could have been still quite corrupt and behaving poorly. I'm not making the Canaanites all out to be a bunch of innocents.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree that there were times. There are times that Israelites worship.
But Elder Yarah, I want you to deal with that point that he made. I don't want you to not run from it, but overlook it. God Yahawah having a wife.
Well, I'm not overlooking it. I'm addressing it. I think that when we see that, that's clearly a Canaanite practice, right? Distinct from what we see from Israelites, and then at some point they did pick up that practice again, as we talked about earlier. We saw the Asherah pole in the temple, in the holies of holies, right? And so that's when we talked about Josiah's reform. You did see that at some point, but you saw a purging of that, and what you see is that, and I think that's why we see, from my understanding, this is why we see those who were excommunicated or Jews that left who still wanted to worship Asherah. We see them show up in Aswan and Elephantine, right, at times, right, because they still wanted to worship that. We see also Asherah talked. We see Asherah talked about quite a bit. We see references of the Queen of Heaven, right? We see references even of the screeching owl. I don't think a lot of people actually talk about that. I believe in the book of Isaiah, the screeching owl, especially when you brought up where you're saying Anat in the Ugaritic text is not mentioned, but we often see that owl as one of her motifs as well.
Right. Owls are important. Owls and birds. That's the heavenly part, and then the snakes are the chthonic underground part.
Absolutely. And so I think we do see references to these deities, but clearly we see in the biblical text, in the biblical narrative, these ritual orgies that are often looked down upon, but they were attributed, as you said, to these goddesses, right? I do believe that one of the goddesses that you see clearly by the name, as you mentioned, is Katesh. I talk about this very often. We see the goddess Katesh, and then you see it at some point synchronize itself in the Israelite belief, but it's masked as the Ruach HaKodesh, right? Or later on, by the time we get to the New Testament understanding, is considered the Holy Spirit, right? Or some will say in other texts, Sophia or wisdom, exactly, as it's called, as it's referred to. But again, there's quite a few instances, and I agree with you, where we clearly see that being, I would say, quashed in the biblical narrative in regards to any power given to the feminine deity.
Yes, but those traditions still continued because they're directly related to the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece. So in the Dionysian cults, in the Bacchus cults, they continue, keep on doing all that orgy stuff for another 1,000 years. There was a slight reformation to shift it from a goddess to being a gay male character, Dionysus, who's a gay male figure instead of a female figure as a central sex person. Nonetheless, other than that, the traditions basically continue unabated for another 1,000 years. And when today's modern academics, and I'm not saying you make this argument, but today's academics will say that the Kadesha, that there's no evidence that they were prostitutes, there's no sex going on. I think they're ridiculous. I think there's always sex going on. Like there's always sex. I mean, maybe they're not prostitutes. Maybe it's unfair to call them a prostitute per se. That might be unfair. But to say there's no sex or no harlotry, that's like crazy. There's totally sex going on.
Yeah, we clearly see that later on in some of Paul's letters that are attested to him, that he's dealing with this to a degree, where he's dealing with the cult of Aphrodite, basically where the men are dressing, where we get our term transvestite from. Pretty much, they're dealing with that term. They're there in
the Old Testament too. They're the Kadesh.
Exactly,
the Kadesh
exactly, and that's what Aphrodite
of the Galli priests of Rome.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say you clearly see this Kadesh being worshipped as Aphrodite later on. I believe it's the same deity that they're dealing with.
I'll give you my theology on it. It's a triple goddess. So mother, maiden, and death, and they have fluid identities. So like it's all one goddess who takes three forms. So, and you see them repeated over and over again. So in the Bible, it's Asherah is the mother, Astarte is the maiden, Anat is the death character. In Egypt, it's Hathor, Bastet, and Sekhmet. For the Hindus, it's Parvati, Durga, and Kali. For the Greeks, it was Demeter, Persephone, and Hecate. And there's more. There's a bunch of them. There's more of them. They're in the Quran, too. The satanic verses in the Quran have the Arabian three goddesses. Alat is the mother goddess, just like Allah, it's Alat. And then there's two others whose name escape me. So this triple goddess formulation repeats over and over again. And my argument is that that's one big, very old, very widespread religion that has been long since fractionated out into its different cultural, manifestations, but that it is a very, very old, very popular, widespread tradition. Not to say universal, but old and widespread.
Yeah.
How many zeros are in a billion?
8, 9.
9.
Yeah, 369. So but yeah, I mean, if you're talking about in regards to academic scholarship, that's clearly what we see. But as we go into the biblical narrative, right, we clearly see there is a line drawn in the sand, so to speak, a proverbial line drawn in the sand as to what Israelites, specifically Israelites, the God of Israel, is to be seen as and to be worshipped as, and how it's and how that's done. So I agree that we see a lot of these things. I think most people don't realize that even in the Bible, there were so many cults and priesthoods that were in play.
It's wide open. You can invent whatever gods you want. It's polytheistic world. You can invent a new god at will.
Absolutely. And so I think that when I never make the blanket statement that all Israelites only worshiped the God Yahweh or YHWH. I never make that statement because it's simply not true. We see in the book of Ezekiel where they were worshiping Shema.
They're clearly fighting about it, right?
Yeah, it's just crazy to make that statement. But we clearly see, based on the commandments that Moses brought down, that there was to only be worship of one deity, one God, and Israelites were to have that understanding and maintain that understanding, and live accordingly. And so to the premise that Israelites had two gods that were ruling parallel in the Bible from the beginning to the end, until at some point they become synchronized. I think it's an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to this because I think we agree on more than we don't, and that there's some nuance in that. And because I don't actually have a position on when the Yahwehs first linked them up. I just think that they start as two separate gods, and at some point in the Yahweh's mind, they're being synced, and then they're arguing about it to the rest of the community to try and convince the rest of the community to come over to their point of view. And that takes like 500 years basically for them to convince everybody else. So I'm going to bring my slides, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. I have been building on this type of conversation, believe it or not, for quite a while. Just doing the research myself. So I love to present what I have and show you what I have, and that way, we can have a discussion
And so what's your commute? Ask the question the correct way. Faith community background that you're coming from, any particular community, or are you representing Black Hebrew Israelites, or I'm not really sure what your background is?
Yeah, I'm representing Black Hebrew Israelites. I know some people stray away from the term Black Hebrew Israelites for, modern political reasons. But I don't have, there are, we are many, with many different, doctrinal statements to a degree, but specifically, I believe in, what we're reading in the Hebrew Bible, as well as what we're reading to a degree in the New Testament in regards to the historicity of the New Testament. So I don't really deal with much of the dogma in the New Testament. It's more so as, was Jesus a real person? Yes, I agree that he was. So those types of things. So with that, I am, I'm very, very hopeful we can get together at some point. And
anytime. Let me get to the holidays, and I'll get my slide deck done, and I'll be ready to rock.
Yeah, and we can definitely do that. I think it's interesting. It's a lot more to bring out. I'm sure you have a lot more.
I'm not gonna let y'all get away like that. Nah, y'all can't get away with that. You're gonna have to do more than say that you believe that Jesus was a real character.
Are we going to get into Jesus in this new? I don't think we're going to debate Jesus in this slide deck.
No.
We can debate Jesus in another slide deck because I got plenty to say on Jesus.
No, y'all ain't going to debate that. But I want to know right now, because y'all made a statement saying that Jesus was a real character. What facts, what proof do you have? Where's the evidence? Because believing in something is not evidence. In fact, it's the very opposite. We just believing in things we don't understand. So who have proof that Jesus existed? Just like if you was to say, where's your proof that Ramesses existed? Where's your proof that Akhenaten was a real character? And then we could go into that and show you. You see, it's a process. So I'm asking
so you've got Richard Carrier on your wall there, right behind your head there, Sa.
Yes.
So Richard Carrier is like the crown prince of like taking all of this material and totally deconstructing it. He's an outstanding scholar, right? I give Richard Carrier a ton of credit for his scholarship, and he's done a great job of like deconstructing these texts and showing how if you deconstruct them completely, you end up with a pile of rubble, and there's really nothing. There's no there if you want to be as critical as possible. And I don't have any material facts that you're not going to find in Richard Carrier's work, in terms of like evidence. What I would say is that the context for why we don't get more information about Jesus, historical Jesus, and why I think he was real is because he was clearly an anti-Roman rebel. And so Jesus and his disciples were anti-Roman. And then you get the Roman-Jewish War, which was Christians tend to not make a very big deal about it. I think the Roman-Jewish War is central to the whole thing because like Jesus and whatever he was arguing for, and I'm not convinced he was Torah Orthodox. Some people like to say he was Torah Orthodox. I don't really think so. But I do think he was anti-Roman. And so when the Romans win that war and they kill all of his disciples, and in that era when they're being persecuted by Emperor Nero, because that's in the days leading up to the war. Yeah, sure, they're being persecuted by Nero because they were anti-Roman rebels. And then they lose the war. So they're all wiped out. Paul is a pro-Roman guy. He's a Roman citizen. He doesn't get along with the disciples. Why? Because they're anti-Roman and he's pro-Roman. He's a pro-Herodian Jew. So he's trying to make the case of trying to take out all the politics and make it just a spiritual Jesus who's not talking about anything political. And then after the war is over, all the original disciples are dead. Anyone preaching anti-Roman anything is gone. And the Gospels are all written after the war, and they're clearly pro-Roman, anti-Jewish documents that are politically infused to... The Romans always wanted to have a Romanized religion version of every religion for every country. There's a Romanized version of Egyptian religion, Romanized version of Greek religion, Romanized version of the Magna Mater, that's Sibylle. They would bring in all of these religions. ISIS was huge. ISIS was absolutely huge in the Roman era. But the Jews resisted. They would not let them have a Romanized version of Judaism. And not only that, they wouldn't even participate in the Roman public, emperor worship at all and had to get special exemptions. The Romans hated this, and the Jews hated the Romans. And so eventually it all comes to a war. The Jews lose, but I think Christianity is invented by James Valiant has this great book called Creating Christ, where he gets into Emperor Vespasian and all this stuff, which I'll let him to that argument. But the guy who wins the war, and so it's a very dramatic moment in Roman history because Nero dies, the emperor dies, commits suicide, but he doesn't leave an heir. And so you end up in the year of 4 emperors, right in the middle of this war, right in the middle while they're waging this war on Jerusalem. You end up in this complete political mess in Rome where there's all these people fighting for the throne. And the guy who ends up with this, they call it the year of 4 emperors because Nero dies, and then there's 2 more claimants. They both get killed. And then the guy who ends up with the throne is Vespasian, and he's the guy who sacked Jerusalem. Him and his son Titus. They're the generals that destroyed Jerusalem, defeated the Jews, stacked the temple, brought back the menorah, and all that stuff. That's all Vespasian and his son personally. They're the ones who end up as the new emperors, first Vespasian and then Titus. They set up the next lineage of Roman emperors, and it's under Vespasian that all the Gospels get written as pro-Roman, anti-Jewish documents saying, hey, Pontius Pilate, he's a great guy. He really wanted to free Jesus. And it's really the Jews that wanted him dead. And give unto Caesar as unto Caesar. And, slave obeys your masters and turn the other cheek. All this stuff that is not objectionable to Roman. There's nothing objectionable to any of that stuff. There's nothing seditious in any of the Gospels. So that's my take, is that the Gospels are written in the context of blaming the Jews and making the Romans look great and giving an avenue to Jews that want to be pro-Roman to become Christians, and that for Romans that were interested in Jewish philosophy and theology, because that actually had a lot of attraction to Romans. They were very interested in the monotheism. That had a lot of popularity. It gave them a chance to become Christians and just blame the Jews for everything. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, and I mean, and that's sort of been sort of the modern, sort of take on the historicity of Jesus for those who think. But I really begin that argument with Paul, right? And this is the reason why I begin that argument with Paul, because most historians or most scholars agree that Paul was a real person himself. Sure. That we at least have 7 authentic letters of Paul. Some of the others we can dismiss to a degree or have some argument over, but we have at least 7 authentic letters from Paul. And because of that, we clearly see and we know Paul's background. Paul says a few things, right? Paul says, first of all, I am of the tribe of Benjamin. I am a Hebrew of Hebrews, and I am an Israelite. Paul makes these 3 statements, right, to sort of give us an understanding that he's really not just a Roman sympathizer because he has Roman citizenship. Okay. One of the reasons why Paul has Roman citizenship is because Paul lived in Tarsus, which is modern day Spain. So he lived in that area, but during that particular time, I believe it was Augustus Caesar, those that lived in that land at the particular time was given citizenship based on Caesar's benevolence. And because Paul lived in Tarsus at the time that that decree was made, that he was declared a Roman citizen. And so at times we see throughout the scripture, Paul uses it to his advantage. And so I think that this mystifies people. And then I think that at other times we read that Paul had family, right, or close friends that he grew up with that was claimed to be, as it reads sometimes, being of the house of Yarah.
Right.
Well, we have to understand when we actually began to study the land that they lived in at that particular time, that whole region was considered the house of Herod. You could be a slave and be of the house of Herod, not necessarily a blood-born family member. So when we read that, people often take the assumption, oh well, see, he's related to he's kin to Herod. Well, it doesn't give us that. Like I said, anyone of the house of Herod could have been a slave. You could have been someone that dug a ditch, but that didn't make you blood-born.
But still, you got to imagine that there's factions among the Jews, some that want this civil war, and there's some that want to be like, let's get along with the Romans. Let's not fight the Romans. So you got to assume that there's factions there, and that that the Herodians I take as a clue for being non-rebels, that they're down to get along with the Romans. That's the way I read it.
Yeah, and so we also know that Paul even makes attestations of at moments where he persecuted the quote unquote Christian movement. This quote unquote, I wouldn't even call it Christian movement at this time. The followers of the way, right? Or these
because they were rebels.
Yeah, these rebels, right? They were the followers of the truth, right? As they would have been called to a degree. So he persecuted them, not simply based because he was a Roman sympathizer, but because he thought they were anti-Torah. Right? He didn't really think that they lived out the Torah, that they were.
Good question. Do you think Jesus is a Torah Orthodox, or do you think he's got some radical beliefs?
I think he's clearly Torah Orthodox, based on some of the scriptures that we have in regards to him, especially with the one that the woman is brought before him for adultery, right? And they're going to stone her, right? And he makes the famous statement, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." And then he bends over and he begins to write something in the sand, and then they drop the stones and turn away. Well, as an Orthodox Torah believer, he would have understood that you needed two witnesses in order to stone her according to the Torah law. So just them bringing just this one person, they wouldn't have had a right to stone her. They would have actually had to bring the male, the person that she was actually committing adultery with, right? And so because that didn't occur, no two witnesses, they had no legal right, according to the orthodoxy, according to Torah, that they could actually stone her. And then you have some scholars who even say that's what he actually bent down to write in the sand. He began to write out this Torah law. So I do believe he does carry clearly a Torah orthodoxy. I do believe that he
So what's your take on the Eucharist then? Because that doesn't seem very Torah orthodox to me.
No, it absolutely isn't. And I'm glad that you brought that up, right? So because as we begin to talk about the Eucharist understanding, I believe it's completely different from what we see when we get into Catholicism, right? I believe they have a completely different take and understanding of how the Eucharist evolved to what we do when we see sort of the Last Supper, right? When we see Luke's account, when he says he records how take this bread, this is my body, take this cup, this is my blood, do this in remembrance of me, different things of that nature. Well, if we actually go back and look at when Abraham actually meets Melchizedek, right? In Genesis, what does he bring him? He brings him bread and he brings him wine. And I think this is the alliteration where we see in the book of Hebrews, where Paul even talks about, if you attested to Paul, that Paul talks about he is after the order of Melchizedek. So I believe that is an alliteration and a connection back to that particular period of time between the bread and the wine as an offering. As setting himself up as the king of peace, or the king of Salem, as we would understand Melchizedek to have been. So I believe that is an alliteration to that, not saying that Christ is Melchizedek, but not at all. But I do say that the reason why I believe we have evidence for Paul is because Paul was persecuting Christians. He was persecuting those who was following Yahshua, right? Or some say YHWH, but he was persecuting them. Some say, well, Paul never met Christ. He really didn't have to really meet him because he had a reputation among the Sanhedrin, and he had a reputation among the Pharisees. Paul says at one point, at that particular point, I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. My father was a great Pharisee, right? And so we know Paul had a connection with these people. So the rumblings and we have to assume that he was very well aware, because he was persecuting them. He wasn't just persecuting them because they were Jews and were not Roman sympathizers, as some say Paul was. He was simply persecuting them because of their connection to Yeshua. And that in itself, if most scholars agree that his letters, at least 7 of his letters, are authentic, then we have to say that makes Paul, in my eyes, a contemporary. That makes him contemporary, writing about Christ. Now we can argue if the Gospels was written after, but we know if that is the case, then Paul's letters was written before the Gospels, if we take that position. So then we have to look at Paul, in my understanding, as somewhat of a contemporary. And that is really what we need to substantiate, in my eyes, to substantiate him being a historical figure, that he's writing about this historical figure as he has persecuted his followers, as he has met in regards to his authentic letters. He's met with Peter. He's met with James, the brother of Jesus.
Yeah, this is all good enough for me. I agree.
Yeah, so I think that's enough for me to substantiate the existence of Yeshua.
Yeah, I'm down with all that, and that James, brother of Jesus. I'll accept the Josephus take that he was killed there as we got close to the war. So again, you can split hairs on all of this scholarship and say, there's a million Jameses and a million Jesuses and a million Marys, and how do you know? How do you know? How do you know? And like you can be skeptical to the end of time with every piece of evidence, but like we have plenty of other historical figures we don't have good material for either. We don't have anything for Alexander the Great either that's totally contemporary.
Absolutely.
So we're pretty sure Alexander the Great was real. So
absolutely.
So yeah, I don't like Richard Carrier and the postmodernist academics of his ilk. I respect their technical work, but I take a lot of problems with their interpretations because they're really invested in being atheists, frankly, and not giving any religion any credit at all. Like they really want to have there can't be any there to these stories. There can't be any Exodus. There can't be any Jesus, because if you give them a kernel of truth, a kernel of veracity to the religious folks, then all of a sudden, like, they're atheists. They're committed to the science is the truth, and so they want to, whether they recognize it or not, they've got an axe to grind, and at least subconsciously are in academia are going to always want to tear apart the religious narratives. They don't like the goddess narratives either. So yeah, I've got a lot of issues with. In fact, this is why I'm so happy to have found this community, because I've been trying to knock heads in the walls the last 3 years, trying to talk to academics who don't want to talk to me. Even though I can talk renewable energy with their guy down the hall, which is my profession, on another side of the university, and talk to him for 2 hours. When I call the guy in the religious studies department, don't talk to me.
They running from you. Let me bring in the brother who want to ask the question, who is a Bible believer to the heart. I speak of Revelations. You're in the building. Do you have a question for any of these brothers here?
Hello.
Peace and blessings to everybody on the panel. Brother Yarah, peace and blessings to you. And Brother Edward, peace and blessings to you, sir.
Brother Revelation.
All right, and salute to the General Senator, always, as always. Okay, so what I have a question for you, the Bible. I really love my Bible, according to Senator. And I hear you defending Jesus, so I really like you already, okay? But the thing about it is this. Really, truly, the Bible to me, that one of my favorite texts in the Bible would be 2 Corinthians 7:14, all right? Where it says, if my people who are called by my name should humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sins and will heal their lands. So the question to me basically is, because it says, if my people who are called by my name, but this is the first time I'm talking to you, but Sonnet and they already know I kind of have an obsession with the name of God, you know?
Okay.
So what would you say? I guess this is my basic question. What would you say would be, or you see as the name of God? Would you say that the name of God is really just YHWH? And brother Yarah, this is really for you as well too, because as a Hebrew Israelite as well, all right? And you say that's how do you pronounce that? Yahweh?
I say Yahweh, but please excuse me if I'm just ignorant and like have terrible pronunciation because I mispronounce everything all over the place. So please forgive me. But I use Yahweh. It's the whatever the cheap white way to do it. I don't know if there's like a better, you know, you'll have to forgive me for bad pronunciations because I just am bad about
it's
that.
Okay. Okay. And yet, brother Yarah, you would say the same, that the name of the Almighty Creator of all things is Yahweh. Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I disagree with both of them, and I'll say
right.
this. I'm going to say this. You know, I like to come in and challenge your minds, man. So I'm going to say this: if man names God, then how powerful can Yahawah be? Because don't forget, it is man who gives it the name. God never gave it that name. Man named things. So how powerful is your God when a man got to name it? I know that probably went over y'all head. Y'all don't get it.
No, I get it. I get it. Well,
I get it. You can go ahead, brother Edward. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I like to say,
master at work.
When there's no man left to utter the word God, Mother Nature will still be standing. And mother comes first and mother comes last. So that's where I stand on that question. And as far as the name of God, I am influenced by the Hindus. I think there is one divine with a million names and a million manifestations and countless names and manifestations. And when you're talking about the divine, you're talking about the divine. And I really appreciated what you said. What was that Bible verse you mentioned? Because I thought it was truly wise. I thought that was true wisdom, and that could apply to any religion, and that you could put any name of God in that text, and it would still be wise, whichever you want to say. It's Krishna or whoever else, man. Like it's still gonna be a wise text. I think that was words of wisdom in that text.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't.
that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Revelation X. That's one of my favorite passages of scripture. I wouldn't necessarily say we can just insert any deity in that and still make it make sense from what we understand what's being taught there. But I will say this: that when Yahweh reveals himself to Moses, he says clearly in the book of Exodus, he says, by this name, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did not know me, right? So what name would that have been?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that would have been, would have been El to a degree. And so this is another point that I make, that we clearly see continuity being made here, that he's saying, hey, listen, I have been known as El, and I'm known to you as Yahweh. But we clearly see going back before then, if you look at the Midianite tribes of the Shasu of Yahweh, found in ancient Kemetic texts, they talk about the Shasu of Yahuwah, Yahweh. So that name is there. And so, like I said, I think we see continuity. I also am a firm believer that at times, based on what man is observing, I will say this, and what he's dealing with at the particular time, and that what he's entreating his deity for or to do for them, we began to see these different names, right? You start to see El Shaddai, El Rohai. You start to see Jehovah Shisikkanu, Jehovah Nisi. You start to see Jehovah, Jehovah Rohai, right? And you start.
I'm sorry. And I don't mean to cut your crop, but wouldn't you consider those things titles, though? Would you more or less call
Yes,
them like
these are
names?
they're titles or attributions of specific manifestations that we
Okay, yes.
see, whether they're observing these things in nature or whether they're observing these, whether they're observing these things manifested to them as they believe in the physical realm. These are titles and attributes of the same deity, but I
Yes,
don't
sir.
believe that you could insert Krishna or Shiva or into those slots as you please. I think there's a strict line
Well,
that
that's why I'm not an Israelite. Yeah,
draws us, draws in the sand, right? It clearly tells us we can't say that we can't say that it's Ra. We can't say that it's Amun, right? We can't say that. It clearly makes a distinction in the scripture that is not who we're referring to. In regards to these people, and not that they weren't influenced by them. Certain sex work, we clearly see that. I think it still deals with the human element, right? So it's different things. As I said before, they were henotheists, so they did believe there were more than one God, but they believed in one true deity, right? No parallel.
So would you say that okay? So let's say like a Buddhist, somebody that does not know Christ, they don't speak English or nothing like that, but they do practice some form of holiness. They probably would follow Buddha, yeah? Would you say that person would not be able to achieve salvation, even though their actions is actions of righteousness, but they don't call the name of Christ?
Well, I don't believe that. I mean, I don't believe that you have to call the name of Christ to receive salvation. One,
Okay.
but number two, if you're referring to this is what I always say when people ask me that question. Well, how come we just can't say Buddha and we never heard anything else? There's a great story, right, in the book of Jonah, right? We've heard it before. Jonah is told to go and speak and tell the Ninevites, right, what thus saith Yah, right? This is what he said, and this is what you should do, right? And when he finally, after all of his contention with Yahweh about doing this, and he's being reprimanded and swallowed by the great fish or whatever, right? We see him being spit out on the shores of Nineveh. If you understand the ideology in that, you'll see that they believe in the god Dagon, this half fish, half man. So we can follow that at another date. So you can kind of see where that's going, right? Mm-hmm. So this is what they thought when they saw him, on coming up on the shores, right? But he gets to the king of Nineveh, right? And the king of Nineveh says, listen, we thought we were worshiping the one true God. And he says, no, I've been sitting here to tell you that you weren't. And if you continue, then Nineveh is going to be destroyed, right? And so we clearly see that there's given no excuses in the Bible for saying, I worship a deity ignorantly, right?
Well, there's no question that is one of the most brilliant things that the biblical writers did, was to turn the Assyrian invasions into Yahweh's power, and take away it all from, because the Assyrians worshipped Ashur, and they said Ashur was a supreme god, and so they would have been quite amused to think that Yahweh was more superior than Ashur. But then when Nineveh gets destroyed and the Assyrians get wiped out, then Yahweh can say, well, you see, you should have been listening to me all along. So yeah, that's it's a really powerful argument that the biblical writers make, and it's a really it works really well to make their case.
Thank you, brothers. I'll let somebody else get in, sir. That's okay.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Nice talking to you.
All right.
Yes,
let me get my man Dominican. You in the building? Go ahead, brother. You was here first. You got a question? Let's go.
What's good, sir? And peace to everybody on the panel. I had two questions. First, it was kind of similar to what the other brother asked regarding the name. So I was reading about Moses on the mountaintop, right? So when he sees that bush, and it's I guess the bush was quenched, and we see the angel, he calls out to Moses, right? Make a long story short, this angel, he ends up telling Moses that his name is I Am. So I first wanted to ask, is there a chance that that angel was being facetious? Was that sarcasm? Being that when we look at Revelations, we see that God will give us a new name? That's the question.
All right.
Oh.
Who are you asking that question to?
I would like to hear from Yarah first, honestly.
Yeah, you can take it first.
Okay, no problem. In that particular instance, I believe that what you see there, and I agree with you, you do see there is another being there while there's someone speaking out of the quote unquote burning bush, right? There's this voice that's coming from the actual flame of fire, right? That we understand to be Yahweh, right? Or YAHWH. But also then we see this angel there, and it's what we refer to, or I refer to, and scholars refer to as a theophany, right? This representation of the spirit of the Most High Yah, right? It's a representation of him there. So I don't think that he was being facetious or that he was or being
like in this, not to cut you off, Yarah, but like in a sense, like just tell them that I am sent you. Just tell, like almost like saying like Moses is telling them that I'm God as well, because we see that the Israelites were referred to as gods. So it's like tell them I am. You know what I mean? It's kind of
absolutely. And the reason why I sort of took the answer that way is because the scripture tells us we're not to worship angels, right? So if we were saying that that's just a simply angelic being, that would be going against the actual biblical narrative itself. But if we're saying, that's why it has to say that that is Yahweh, right? It is I am, right? So that Moses can also take direction from that entity that he sees. Some make the argument that that's the first Christophany, right? Or the first one of the
killing me with these big words, Yarah.
I'm sorry, the first manifestation of the spirit of Yeshua or Yahawashi, right? Some people make that argument that that's the first, one of the first early on instances that we see of that. I don't necessarily appeal to that. I know some people are going to argue with me against that. I don't necessarily appeal to that, but I do think that is just it's a manifestation of.
Is there any validity to that Revelations point though? Like being that he, it's prophesied that we would get a new name. That's what I'm saying. Is like
yes, I do believe that.
To that.
I do believe that, and you'll see that. I believe that you'll see that throughout ancient Near Eastern culture, right? That you'll see that a lot of times, as people are being are oppressed, as people are being oppressed, and they're coming out of these things, that the new name is not necessarily one of say like you're getting a new noun, a new pronoun, you're changing your physical name, but it's one of authority, right? You're getting this newfound authority and governance, this new power. So when it says we're getting a new name, that's how I understand that to be in Revelation. But yeah, I agree with you.
Right. Did you want you?
All right. Hold on. Let me come around. Hold on. Silent K, you on the call? You on the call, Silent K? You got a question?
Yes, sir. Salute, Satnetta. What's up, big bro?
Peace, brother. Peace.
Okay. Hey, how you doing today, Mr. Dodge? And also Elder Yarah. Man, Elder Yarah, I gotta tell you, man, I'm really impressed how studious you are, you know what I'm saying, when it comes to this Bible and the history about the Bible. I gotta give you props on that. But y'all talking about the God El, and I'm probably not as qualified to ask you this question like Jabari would, but I want to ask you: did the God El, the one that they have artifacts of a God El in that so-called land of Canaan, and he's wearing the hat, I don't know, the crown of Upper Egypt or Lower Egypt? Can I ask one of you guys first, you Elder Yarah, can you expound on that for me? Is that the same God El that you talk about, the one that had on the crown of Upper Egypt?
Great question. No, it is not the same deity of El that I'm referring to and that we refer to in the scriptures. But the Canaanites did have a deity of El in their pantheon. that when the Canaanites, like especially in the city of Jebus, they were a vassal state. You know, they were a vassal state of Egypt, and so we see this oftentimes in their motif. Their god wearing the crown, the two plumes. I believe it's two plumes, right, or something like that. The crown of both Upper and Lower Egypt. That was just on Canaan's vassalage to ancient Kemet. And that's why you see it there on their deity form of El. And this is where I draw, and again, this is why I say the Bible gives us this. That's why I love it so much, because it gives us distinct lines to follow, right? It tells us that we're not to make any graven image. That's given early on, right? Coming through Moses, right? By the time we see that, we should not make any graven images of things above and things below, right? And to worship these things, right? And so when we show these deities of El, and we see El or Yahweh on a chariot, right? And we see it has these different motifs. Those things are not clearly coming from those writers that we clearly see in the biblical narrative, although there were Israelites that did worship these other deities, right? Yeah. I won't denounce that at all.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Yarah on that. I think that that's the Canaanite depiction of El, and that, Egypt ruled Canaan for 400 years prior to the Bronze Age collapse, or prior to the Exodus. So there's a ton of synchronization between Egyptian and Canaanite religion for a couple hundred years. And so the goddesses, specifically Asherah, there's a ton of art. They are being worshipped in Egypt too. So Asherah, Astarte, Anat were being worshipped in Egypt too. So we see a ton of connection. All the polytheistic pagan stuff that the Canaanites were doing, that they talk about in the Old Testament, that's being denounced. You can see aspects of it in Egypt, and a ton of mixing in Egypt. But that's exactly the stuff that they're reforming and getting rid of.
Can I ask you a question? You said
Yarah refers to.
You said the word syncretism, and you said Asherah. Is that like Roman or Greek? What is that?
Asherah is mentioned 40 times in the Old Testament. She was a Canaanite mother goddess, and they're getting rid of her.
And didn't I hear you earlier equivocate her to the god Isis, Demeter, and all those other ones, Hathor?
Hathor specifically, yep. Yeah, in Egyptian art, it has her Hathor has got this famous hair, she's known for her hair. So the hair symbolism, same as the crown, you always know it's Hathor's hair. It's a very specific, hairdo.
Yes, sir.
So you see images of Asherah, specifically the images that are labeled Kadesh, where there's a really famous image, and Sonetter, I'm gonna have you use this for my little logo, but it's the image of they call her Kadesh in these images, but it's Asherah, and she's standing on a lion, and she's got the Egyptian god Min to her right and the Canaanite god Reshpesh to her left. Min is a fertility god. Reshpesh is a death god, so it's another one of these life-death cycles, trinities. And she's got snakes in one hand and sacred plants in the other hand, and she's naked. And so that's and she's got Hathor's hair. So that's one of these images that's showing the synchronization between Canaanite and Egyptian tradition prior to the arrival of the Israelites.
Okay, one more question, and I'm gonna leave. See, I can't speak for everybody in the HOK paradigm, but a lot of us believe that when you're talking about Isis, that would represent the original form of this goddess, like the template for all the other goddesses to come after. Do you all have any evidence that any of these other goddesses that you're talking about are older than the Egyptian traditions? And that's my last question.
I think the Egyptian and Sumerian writing are contemporary to each other, so they're equally old. My understanding, I'm not an expert on all the Egyptian ins and outs, is that Hathor is a little bit older than Isis, but that Isis became more popular in later eras. But they're also often syncretized, and all the goddesses are readily syncretized. As part of the nature of goddesses is that their identities are always quite fluid. And so their Isis and Hathor get mixed together. Isis and Demeter get mixed together. So they're all quite fluid. It's a nature of goddesses.
Okay. Do you agree with him, Elder Yarah?
Yeah, there are many. I mean, there are many depictions of these goddesses. I think Isis. I think you see Isis worship almost before you see Ra worship, to a degree. But you see Semiracis. You see that tied into Ishtar, and you see that tied in to ISIS as well. You see this stuff has been is been in Yana. You see all of these things, and the reason why you can put them together is that they basically have the same symbols. We talked about the owl earlier. You see them standing on the owl. You see them standing on these things. So you will see these worships. Now, if you're asking me, if you're saying, are these things the oldest? I see something at his face. If these things are older than what we see in the biblical narrative, of course, we can see it's older than the biblical narrative, but did it exist before we had a Bible? That I think that's the question that a lot of you guys get stuck at. So we see that these things existed before the Bible. I often ask people, what is the oldest religions that we've known man to have? And that's shamanism and animism, right? So if we start talking about animism, you have to go all the way back to the Arabian Valley culture, the Indus Valley, and a lot of different things that we see. We see people talk. You can start talking about Brahmanism and different things like that, and where that came down through various cultures. So we can see things that existed well before 3000 BCE, or if you're talking about pre-dynastic 5000, if you're talking about before 6 or 7000 BCE, pre-dynastic cultures, I don't see ISIS there. I haven't seen it.
Well, I mean, you do see Mother, not ISIS specifically, but I come from the Maria Gambudis school. You guys probably don't know who she is, but she's an archaeologist. She argued for that goddess religion was the original religion in old, what she calls old Europe. And I agree. I think you can take the Venus figurines all the way back to the Ice Age, tens of thousands of years ago. And all the mythologies always indicate the mother came first, except for the Abrahamic traditions. They're the only ones.
The only ones that got it right.
Now, hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. I got to move on. Because I don't know what's going on, Elder Yarah. The teachings of Brother Jabari is somehow streaming through your veins, brother, your bloodstream. You're starting to cross over a little bit. This is what I'm hearing, bro. Hold on. Okay. You never gave Kemet no credit for nothing.
I mean, he's asking me a question.
Is he really going this way?
I mean, he asked me a specific question.
No, but I'm proud of you though, because you're learning real scholarship. I'm proud of you. I want to say that. Don't get discouraged by me, brother.
I'm not discouraged by you. I mean,
stay on that wave, brother. And I was saying this new year, I could see it. I could see you growing in knowledge and information, brother. Stay there.
I appreciate that. I think it's a compliment. But if you ask me a specific question about Kemet, it is what it is, right? And we're talking about academics. He asked me an academic question, right? Mm-hmm. That's different from what we believe in the Abrahamic faith. It's just it's different, right? So if you ask me two different questions, I'm going to give you the proper answers accordingly. So, but that is
all right. Let me go.
Can I see
Suntan?
I'm sorry, I just want
to get Suntan first. You spoke
already.
Okay. And then I'm coming back to you. I'm gonna come around. Suntan, you got the mic. Unmute yourself.
All right, peace to brother Elder Rob, Yarah, and peace to brother Edward Dodge. This is like a two-part question, and you guys can take your time and think about it. And it's going to be a run-on question. So, do you figure that the Abrahamic faith, and I'm not mocking or I'm not shooting no shots, but do you think the Abrahamic faith was a group of very, very poor people? And then I'm going to run on and say this. I want both of you guys to answer that first. Do you think the Abrahamic faith was a group of poor people?
In the first temple? No, they were like...
Period. What? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that, the prophets are clearly hanging out with the kings in the first temple, and they're not you know, they're not fringe characters in society. They are respected. They're respectable enough to get in the court. So, and talk face to face with the king. So I don't know how much money they got in their pocket, but they're not like disrespected marginal people.
Okay.
They are, you know, they have some authority in society. I couldn't tell you how much money they've got.
But I don't want to know. I just want to know the culture. Brother Yarah, to you.
No, I don't think they were. I don't think they were a poor people, but I think that you have to demarcate that on a you know, on a chronologically on a timeline, right? If you go back and you study ancient Near Eastern culture and you go into Abraham's narrative, he would have been a very wealthy man.
Okay, well, that's, excuse me, because that's all I need to know.
Yeah.
Now, here's the run-on question. The Egyptians were mostly, not all, but the pharaohs and everything like that were very wealthy people. They was able to preserve themselves and their culture. Why wasn't the Abrahamic faith able to do this? And they say that the Abrahamic faith didn't have the knowledge of, you know, mummification and things of this nature. When mummification came first, and they also had the knowledge of Egypt before the Abrahamic faith was supposed to be originally endowed. Now, my question is, why isn't any other Abrahamic faith preserved just as the Egyptians are preserved? Because it took money to do that. So I can't see Paul, nobody, and I'm not taking no shots again, because I've been in Christianity all my life, but where are the people of this Bible? And the last question, do you guys actually believe what you're saying to us today? Or do you, when I say believe, do you believe it was real people or was it metaphor? And that's it.
I believe, I'll tell you, I think that the Book of Kings specifically is real history. Like, it's propaganda, like it's one-sided, heavily slanted. My side is great, the other side is horrible. But that it's all real people right through the Book of Kings. So I think that much is real history. And as far as like stuff before that, it's more mythical, but it's hard to know because it's pre-literate and it's.
Right.
I think the Book of Kings going forward, or the Book of Kings specifically, is real history.
I asked that because of the mythical things that happen, as walking water, healing the blind, doing all these miracles and things of that nature. Would you think that was real, sir, or do you think that was metaphoric to be a teaching tool, to build faith amongst the people?
You talking like miracles of Jesus?
Was real? That's what I'm trying to ask you.
Like New Testament miracles of Jesus? Yeah. The things that are clearly supernatural, like the walking on water and the wine and the water into wine, that story is clearly taken from a Dionysus story. Some of these stories are clearly metaphorical or allegorical. Does that mean the real Jesus was not a healer?
No, I don't.
I think that the real Jesus could very much have been a healer and could have had some very remarkable capabilities.
This was asking. I'm trying to put it out there so the people.
I totally think the guy had a reputation as a healer, probably for a reason.
Yeah, and like I said, no pushback. I just want people to understand my premise because, like I said, I'm, 63, and I've been through this. So now I found a new way through going this way, that this was here before the Abrahamic faith. Sure. Would you say it was or wasn't?
Of course it was. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's what led me on to another trail. So if the Abrahamic faith was not poor people, why isn't there any remnants of any of these people? Can you answer that?
Because they kept getting wrecked by all these empires that burned them all out. I mean, we have some evidence. We have lots of evidence from the Book of Kings. And I do think there was a first temple. I think that there's Phoenician style, like there's enormous megalithic stones that tourists can see in the first temple that I think are in the Temple Mount that I think are I probably go back to the first temple, I would expect, because they're Phoenician style. So I think there's evidence in archaeology to, again, confirm the Book of Kings for sure. And that basically from 900 BC going forward, we have pretty good evidence of stuff being real.
All right. After this, I'm done. Where no Paul, I'm talking about the important apostles. Yarah, this is for you. Where are they? The important apostles, not just everybody. The important apostles. Peter, Paul, James, where are these people?
Well, if you're asking where are their bodies and where their graves and different things like that, there is there is some understanding that that I believe the Vatican claimed they have the skull of Peter or something like that. I think there are many different a lot of these basilicas that you see claim to be were built over the sepulchres or tombs of these apostles in the Bible. I believe there was an article that came out maybe about 10 years ago now where they showed ISIS, the terrorist group ISIS, over near Damascus, blowing up the tomb that was venerated of Jonah, right? And different things like that.
Damn shame, right?
Yeah, a shame. And so, I mean, when we began to ask these things, what the question that you're really asking is about the material culture of the Israelites. They didn't necessarily mummify people, right? Which would preserve bodies, right? So, not necessarily. So, speaking of, like where they are and what's the existence of these people and how come we can't find them, a lot of them were tortured, eaten by animals, burned at the stake. These things actually happen. Thrown in paupers' graves, different things like that. You have different. There's some attestations and some of the early church fathers that talk about how Peter didn't think himself worthy to be crucified like Yeshua, so he was crucified upside down. His body and only his skull survived. There were different things like that. John was beheaded, right, and his head was paraded around in front of the
So you believe this stuff was real, y'all?
Herodians. Right? I do believe there is. I do believe that it actually did occur. Now, if you're asking me about whether or not Yeshua was a healer, I spoke about this earlier.
Oh no, I wasn't asking about that. I was just asking about where are they, because that was one of my searches like 6 years ago. I went on a search for remnants and places, things of that nature, and I came up empty.
Yeah,
you find anything sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know why you came up empty.
I came up empty.
There's a lot out there.
I was looking for important people and important remnants.
Well,
I wasn't looking for just the regular, happy-but-go-lucky Israelite or Hebrew. I was looking for people who played a part in.
Well, that's what I'm saying about the apostles and different things. They tell you that they were all killed in various different ways. Some were thrown to lions. They were eaten alive. This is what we tell. Especially, this is why I agree clearly with Edward when he talks about we should look into the Romans siege of Jerusalem. Even going back as far as Nero, even going back, starting around 66 CE, and then onward to 70 AD, you'll hear a lot of things that they had gone through, right? How they were being tortured, how you would hear about some issues of cannibalism that happened inside and among the Israelites themselves, right?
Well, don't you find it quite funny that they all was killed off?
Oh, I mean, they had to die at some point. They were rebels to the Roman government,
right?
So a lot of them did have targets on the back, and a lot of them were willing to die. Here's another thing: a lot of them were willing to go into martyrdom because they thought it made them closer to the testimony of Yeshua, right? And they were willing to kill themselves or be destroyed or be thrown in fire.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Appreciate the answer, Yarah and Brother Edward. I appreciate the sincerity and honesty, because you can't just make this up without us, shooting arrows at you. So I appreciate it.
No, those are great questions. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Peace.
Hey, Revelation. Let me get this one real quick, bro, and I'm gonna be out.
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna be out, bro.
Yes, sir. Yes,
my
sir.
last one. All right, for sure. Thank you. Edward Dodge, Mr. Edward Dodge.
Yep.
So the question I have for you, and I guess Yarah can take it too if he has any insight on the question. But so we have the Vishnu Puranas,
okay,
and concerning that text, they mention I don't know which Purana it is, but I guess there's speculation that the story of Adam, the story of Moses, Is there any validity to that?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that one. I haven't studied that particular text, so I can't speak. I do think that generally speaking, you're going to find a lot of crosstalk between the Indian subcontinent. Clearly had its own native indigenous traditions. Shiva and stuff is clearly indigenous, but at the same time, there's a ton of crosstalk with the Indo-Europeans, and so it's got a real mixed. So I think there's clearly, you're seeing ideas floating back and forth, but I can't speak to that specific text. I haven't read it.
I see you got the Hindu god in the back.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of going on in Hinduism, my friend, and so I'm deeply influenced because I'm studying the goddesses, and so I'm deeply influenced by the Shakti components and the Shiva and Shakti,
the tantric aspects.
A little bit. To be honest, it's more the cannabis and the weed. That's what I got started on. That was my whole intro to all of this was cannabis in the Bible, and then figure out how that got thrown out, and that led me into the goddesses. And then I was trying to figure out the goddesses. It led me to all the other neighboring traditions, and so I saw the parallels with the Hindus, with the Ashura, and so I just started putting the pieces together. But there's so much stuff in Hinduism. So I read like the Bhagavad Gita, and I know stuff about Krishna. But I by no means have I read it all. Like there's so much. So it's a deep, deep traditions over there.
What you think about that, Yarah?
As far as the studies that I've done on, I just deal with usually the Arabian Valley, the Arabian culture, and bringing that over into the Indus Valley. I did a study. Actually, I have a show and a study that I listed on my channel that I did on the Aryan migration theory. And so I really went to the study on that, talking about the different classes and that, and then talk about how even there has been I forget the gentleman's name, but he actually claims to have found the tribe of Manasseh in that area in the Indian Valley in India, and in some of those caste systems. And so I think there's a lot there. I think that if we go back and study enough, we'll clearly see a lot of connections of things coming out of that Indus Valley culture. I talk about the excavation in the city of Troy, and the Sanskrit writings and the Vedic writings that were discovered there, and what people call the swastika, that particular symbol, and how it was appropriated by the Nazis over the period of time to show their preeminence or to show their racial superiority. So that's pretty much where I deal with on that particular area. But I also deal with the Hittites that were sort of going in and out of those lands and in those areas for a particular period of time, and dealing with that as well, and really talking about who those people were. So that's pretty much my extent of dealing in that area.
Yeah, and if you read the Gnostic texts, you'll see a ton of like Buddhist sort of like influence and sort of Buddhist-ish kind of, just sort of ideas.
Would you say that same aspect of just El and Enki being associated within the Hinduism text as well?
It's
that crossover, you know what I'm saying? That same kind of influence with the Holy Bible. What was that?
It's not something I've looked into specifically where El shows up in Hinduism, but you probably can find it. El and Enki, you probably can find it. I haven't looked into that connection.
Yeah, I think you can find some connections of El being connected with the Hindus, because what you see is there's some attestations of what appears to be Canaanite child sacrifice practices among the Hindus, but I think it's a connection. It's a connection with their deity El or Molech at the time, and you start to see some connections there, that you would see these these child sacrifice, these images of child sacrifice among the Hindus. clearly at the time that we would probably see Canaanite child sacrifice practices as well.
And the goddess Kali that I've got behind me is totally similar to Anat. They got the necklace of skull, the necklace of freshly severed heads, and the belt of human hands. That Anat is dressed in the same way. She doesn't have 4 arms, but she does have all that, and she's bathing in blood and loves to killing everybody. Just like Sekhmet, also from the Egyptians. So there's clearly a connection on these goddesses because they're like clearly because Parvati, Durga, and Kali of modern day Hindus are a direct correlation to Asherah, Astarte, and Anat. So there's clearly connections.
Thank you.
I think we're back to Revelation X.
Revelation, let's go.
Sir, I've been patient, Sinetta. I wanted to talk to Suntan, and I wanted to say something to Silent K. They're both gone, so Sinetta, you gonna get it. It's your turn, Sinetta. Now listen, Sinetta, you are Kemet, and you gotta defend Kemet right now, okay? Because Suntan scared me. He said he looked for stuff in the Bible. He didn't find anything, Sinetta. So when I do my research, I found Josephus. I found the writings of Pontius Pilate, the report where he spoke of Christ and all of these things. I look at my Bible, Sonata, and I actually see they predicted that the Euphrates was going to dry up, and it is dry right now, Sonata. Sonata, I can tell you that the story of Lot, let me take it there for you because I never did this one before, okay? The story of Lot, Senator. Did Lot's wife turn into a pillar of salt, Senator? Yes or no? Yes or no, eh? Just yes or no, Senator.
Yes, brother. Yes.
Okay. Where is Lot's wife right now? Shouldn't she be somewhere as the big clump of salt or something? Don't you think she should be there?
She's gone, brother.
I mean, I thought there was a bunch of pillars of salt that they call.
I keep telling you, Senator, stop it. Stop lying. She's not gone, Senator. Google it. She's there right now. It is like a monument, Senator. That's what I'm saying. She ain't gone nowhere. But we can show you this and you would still say, nah, brother, that's fake. They made that up. So then tell me, please, all I'm asking, this is my last question. How?
Let's get to the last question. Do
Go
you
ahead.
really believe that a woman have turned into a pillar of salt, brother? And if you really believe that, man, there's something seriously wrong with you, brother. There's really something seriously. You want me to explain? You really want me to?
Here's where.
God, man, stop, man. Come
on. Here's where it gets interesting, though, when we read these stories, right? Like I said, when you really begin to study them, right? So if you're looking for something like out of the Marvel comics, right, or DC comics, where she materializes into a pillar of salt, I don't think that is what could have occurred, or that's what the text is even telling us. But it tells us, if we actually study the actual text, Genesis chapters 18 through 19, you'll see that there's some semblance of volcanic activity, right? Some will say God rained down fire and brimstone out of heaven, right? To me, in that particular area where we understand Sodom and Gomorrah to would have been, we clearly see there would have been some possible volcanic activity in that particular area. Now, if it tells us that if she didn't get far enough away from that particular activity, could have she been covered in what they actually do call volcanic ash? And they do refer to it, I believe, as some type of basalt or something like that. But if she was looking to materialize into that, I don't think she materialized into that. But maybe was she caught in that plume of ash? It's very possible. If you take,
I'll do you one better. Yarah.
Yeah, go ahead.
The modern archaeologists have found, what they argue is that they found the city of Sodom and that it was destroyed by an asteroid or destroyed by a meteor.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Around 1700 BC. I actually think it's a pretty compelling argument. The dating works, the geography works, and it would really make sense that if there really was, a sizable town that was totally demoed by a meteor, which totally is perfectly reasonable thing. I think we get hit by meteors a lot more often than we're given credit for. We had the Tunguska event just 100 years ago, and if that had hit a town, that would have been exactly like they described. And so if a meteor really did blow up Sodom around 1700 BC, then you can imagine how it inspired all these stories. And then they would say things like, well, why did God, they would obviously attribute it to God, so why did God destroy this town? And they say, well, because there are a bunch of sex perverts and a bunch of homosexuals running around being perverts. And so it's just like modern day guys would say, why was that city destroyed? They would also say it's because they're a bunch of perverts. So I think that's because actually I think the cities were super sexual, and I think they are in fact arguing about sexual morality. And so I think that, you know, the cities were sexual, and that if a city really was destroyed by a meteorite, it's not hard to imagine people making that kind of argument, and that those stories becoming legends and myths. I don't think it's hard to imagine at all. And if the evidence really stacks up that they can identify a legitimate meteor strike around 1700 BC in the right spot on the map, I think that's pretty good, darn good evidence.
Yeah, and I think one of the most interesting parts about that particular story that we get to a certain part of Genesis chapter 19, and it says, and Yahweh rained fire down in heaven from Yahweh, right, to a degree, or he called down, or Yahweh called fire down from the heavens from Yahweh, right? So I clearly see, you know, that, you know, in nature, these things are occurring. And that's what we call them. Even when anyone who's filed an insurance claim for a natural disaster, what do they call it? An act of God, right? An
act of God, exactly.
So we clearly see these things that are occurring in real time, in real life, and they're attributing these things to the Most High, or to the Father. Now, and then again, yeah, does the you know, is there a story that says, well, you know, were these sexualized people and different things like that? Absolutely. This is where we get sodomy from, and all of these different. It comes along with that, right? And so this is why I say the writers are they're drawing a very hard line against orgies and different things of this manner.
Agreed. 100% agree.
That we see, right? And we are in the law says we are to follow along these lines, right? If you are an Israelite, right? This is your guard. Or if you're a sojourner amongst the Israelites, right? If you live amongst us, you have to follow these strict laws, statutes, and commandments. And I think people, you know, oftentimes they, you know, I read it in the chat a little bit, and they say, well, Yarah, you're adding and take away from your book. No, it's actually an in-depth study of the culture, the material culture, what they're actually saying, what the phrases are that they were actually using at the time. You can't get a full understanding of it just reading the basic English. You're gonna be miscued, and a lot of people try to do that, and so they walk away with certain understandings. Well, I read it this way. Well, you know, we know that's not what it was talking about if you're actually a student of it, right? So it's not really what it's talking about a lot of times. I think I heard someone mention about certain other things that we see in the scriptures where they talked about was a talking donkey. Do you believe, Yarah, that there was a talking donkey in the scripture? Well, you know, in my if you begin to study the context, it's an old and you could actually read it, right? There's an old Mesopotamian or I would say Sumerian poem or something, or poem or Ugaritic poem that talks about the foolish man, right, and how he's dealing with the donkey. And I believe the writer is using that particular poem at the time because it would have been dated earlier, if not at the time that the writer is writing, to talk about the foolishness of Balaam, right? And so to give us an understanding, not necessarily that a donkey is talking. And I think if we don't take the time to actually understand and actually study the text for actually what it's giving us, instead of us trying to say, well, yeah, it says there's a talking donkey right there, So this is all just make believe. These people actually was writing for a particular purpose. They were writing for a particular purpose. They had a particular agenda. For those of you who don't like that word, and so them writing folklore into a book, or writing something into a book that is far out of the realm of belief, was to bring us back to the understanding, to teach us a real truth, just like Aesop fables, right? We know the tortoise and the hare, right? We understand that, you know, there's no way a tortoise is really going to beat a hare if you're talking about natural speed of that. But what is it trying to teach? Does that make Aesop fables a lie? Does that make the biblical narrative a lie? No, but it's teaching a real truth. And I think that's what we have to understand if you really use, you know, something other than, you know, other than what we see.
Yeah, I agree with that, Yarah, and I just add to it that they're using metaphors for a contemporary audience in those days. They're not speaking to us 2,000 years later. They're speaking to an audience at that time. So they're going to use expressions and metaphors and similes that make sense to their day, and it gets lost, you know, 2,000 years later.
Now, I agree, and thank you, both you guys, for that. And I'm glad that Dr. Reggie's here. Peace to you, Dr. Reggie, because I kind of have a question for you as well. I agree that the Bible, you know, is parables, it's metaphorical. You know, there's even hidden messages and ciphers and all of that. But there are some things that are literal, and there are some things that are historical. Now, Sanata, to answer your question, if God can turn a woman into salt, do I believe that? I don't believe that, but this is what I know. I know God can do anything. I see the sun in the sky. I don't know how it's there.
Now, hold on. Stop right there. You just
go ahead. Go ahead.
You said, do I believe that God turned this woman into salt? No, I don't believe that. But I do believe that God can do anything.
I know.
It's a contradiction, brother.
I know that God could. No. I don't be. I know, Sanata, that God can do anything. Right. I know that.
But you don't believe.
So if Sanata, can you? I can't say I believe it, because the belief comes with a percentage of doubt. And I don't doubt my God. So I would never say that I believe that.
Go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
I know that he can do whatever he wants to do, or whatever, because I don't want to.
Scriptures don't it say that God cannot when they came at him with the horses and chariots, he could not do nothing for them because they were made of iron. So God could not do anything when it came to the horses because they were made of iron. Elder Yarah know what I'm talking about. That's so God said he could.
I love you, boy.
God,
I love it. Okay, wait. Okay, Sanata, you're right. There's certain things God cannot do. He cannot lie. He cannot change. He cannot. I agree. Okay, so there's certain things that God cannot do. But sir, and this is for Dr. Reggie too. This is why I love my Bible even over Kemetic. How would you say Kemetic teachings, right? Yeah. And I'm not throwing any shade. I'm not throwing any shade, sir. But let's talk about the creation story. The Adam and Eve versus, and Reggie, please correct me because I'm not too familiar with Kemet, but the whole Geb thing, and with you know how he does the thing and the spitting out of the seeds and all of this. Is that a creation story, Reggie? Because I'm really not sure.
Yeah, but it's not Geb. Geb is born from that. It's a attempt, and and it's not real. So
okay, good.
Yeah, so it's not real.
Okay, so how
those people who are religiously trying to practice it, for them, they have to prove that it's real, but it's not real. It's just cosmological conceptions of what happens in the universe using particles, right? And so they were smart enough to think about these things instead of saying that it's just magic. They looked at real qualities that's in the universe, and it created philosophies that got us to science, right? It wasn't science, but it got us to philosophies to think about particles and dark matter and things like that. But they envisioned that it was something else that had to occur than just some crazy magic. So they went back and forth with that.
I thank you for that. But the reason why I would probably just stick to Adam and Eve, and this is where kids is concerned. How do I explain a depiction of what you're talking about to my child? You know, because you know the picture, you know the depiction. So now this is the creation story, and I have to explain this to a child. I think I would prefer to just talk about Adam and Eve to this child, Reggie, because I don't even want to.
Then you, how can I say, you're spreading
Go ahead.
ignorance. You're spreading ignorance. You could wait until that they are of age.
Hey, yo, hold on, man. What the hell is Robon coming in here with all this crazy stuff? Pause, Robon. Pause, brother. Ain't nobody talking about semen in the mouth or nothing like that. What the hell? Are you all right, brother? Are you all right, brother?
Right.
Oh,
Well,
man.
whatever.
You got to make sure you go out there and check on your brother Robon, man. He coming all up in here talking about semen in the mouth of, what the hell is going on? Paul.
Yeah. So there's a cosmology that certainly that he's talking about.
I know what he's talking about, but why are you bringing that up? It's all men up in here, man. What the hell is he doing?
Yeah. I can't find the book that I wanted to read, but I want to get to the crux of it. So listen, these are just conceptions. These are thoughts. These people are staring at stars. They're looking at the wind. They're looking at the sun. They're looking at their crops, right? They're looking at the Nile. They're coming up with thoughts, and they deify certain thoughts. Okay, so that's all it is.
And hey, hold up, Reggie. I'm sorry for cutting you, Reggie. I'm very
no
sorry.
problem.
But Robon is a young scholar coming up. He's a young and up and coming scholar. I give him that. But he supposed to know better than that, because the people are not real. Gab is not real. Newt is not real people. And so when you see the penis coming from the navel, pointing to the mouth, he's giving birth to the earth, bruh. I'm surprised that you don't know what's happening here. You see what I'm saying? So
Gab is the earth. Newt is the sky.
Gab is the earth. So they spitting out to the earth, man, to bring forth life. But these are not real people, brother. This is not a real man. Oh man, I'm surprised that
you.
I'm sorry, Reggie. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah. So I just want to check Revelation X if you have any other questions for me before I get into what I need to get into.
You can go into the bill. That's okay. That's about it.
It's okay. So Edward Dodge is always a pleasure. Yarah, it's a pleasure. And of course to the rest of the panel. Let's get into the thing. Is Yahweh? Let's get into the is Yahweh a Canaanite God? Yes or no? What did y'all decide?
I mean, I think the Israelites are Canaanites, so in that context, yes. But I think Yahweh was a young God who gets introduced and into the Canaanite community, and then there's a reformation, and the Israelites are Canaanites. So in that regard, but he's not like an old Canaanite deity,
right? That's exactly right. But I want to get Edward Dodge. Thanks for being here. So Yarah, my brother, called me an idiot a couple of times and things like that. I got you, good brother. Now, is Yahweh a Canaanite God?
Yahweh is a deity in the Canaanite pantheon.
So you don't believe in you don't believe that Canaan is cursed.
As far as
Canaan is cursed,
as
right?
far as the land, or you're talking about the scripture where it says "Cursed be Canaan."
That's correct.
Well, that wasn't something. That's not something that's a. That's not something that is a. When I say "Cursed be Canaan," when you read "Cursed be Canaan," you clearly see that being already played out in the scriptures, where you see Canaan. He has to go. He loses his land. His rights to his land. He actually has to go work among the tents of the elders.
You believe that?
I mean, we see and we see sort of allusions to that. Yeah, we see sort of allusions to that in history, where you see, if you call it, people call it Joshua's conquest. I call it Joshua's liberation, where you see Joshua go in and they're fighting against what they call certain Canaanite tribes, right? The Bible has a specific narrative of who those people are that he's actually supposed to deal with. They're referred to the children of Anak, but then you see where
is Yahweh a Canaanite God? Yes or no?
I already answered you. I answered you that he was, but also no, I answered you also, but the other part to that is he's also a deity among the Israelites. He's the Israelites' high God, but it's not the same Yahweh as we see in the Canaanite pantheon. It's a completely different deity.
It's completely a different deity. Okay, so I'll hold with that. Who is Hakma?
You said what?
Hakma.
I'm not familiar.
I don't know what that is.
You don't know who Hakma is? Wisdom. Her sister is Torah.
Are you speaking something from the Kabbalah?
No, it's in the Bible. Hakma. She's with God. She's with God in the beginning of.
You mean in Proverbs, where I was like wisdom?
He's talking about the Gnostics.
I mean, if you say wisdom, I understand that. But
how do you're supposed to be speaking Hebrew? So Hakma is in the Torah. So you should know that.
But that is what you're speaking of when it talks about wisdom.
Yes.
Who searches that, and Hagma, who searches wisdom. That's not
Hakma.
Hold on. That's not something that they worshipped. So that's why your answer, your question is sort of misleading. That's not something that they worship.
No, it's not.
They didn't worship. Listen, they didn't worship wisdom, and you have to show me that in the scripture.
I didn't say that they worship wisdom. I just asked you who she was, and her name is Hakma.
Well, it's not
to wisdom.
No, listen. So when you say who she was,
no, don't be talking to me like that. When you're talking to Edward Dodge, you're talking very, very nice. You're very, very passive when you're talking to Edward Dodge. So I want the same. I want the same treatment. I want the question. I don't want no affirmative, nothing from you, because I just want to know if Yahweh is a Canaanite God. If he is a Canaanite God, then what you have is a big problem. You actually have a big problem, because now you're dealing with Canaan's curse, and you're dealing with your whole fictional story of them coming from Egypt, right? And killing all the Canaanites, because Canaan is promised. That was the reason why the so-called children of Jacob crossed the land into there and started killing men, women, children, calves, donkeys, and everybody, right? And so you have a problem. If he's a Canaanite, well, I'm not messing with Edward Dodges, because I think he knows that there are pantheons, and he just said it. Yahweh is a young God. He's young in the pantheon. He got to contend with his brothers Baal and stuff like that, right? But my problem with you Hebrew Israelites, or I don't know if you're a Hebrew or Hebrew Israelite, is that you don't seem to really believe in your book today. You're not affirmative.
I'm very. You are watching a mess. You want to continue with the diatribe, but do you have a question?
You are watching a mess.
Excuse me, Reggie.
I just asked a question.
Hey, Reggie, could I ask you something real quick?
Wait,
just to add some context just to the conversation. Are you asking him, is Yahweh introduced during Moses on the mountaintop? Is that something that can help with the conversation?
No, because I know who's this brother right here?
Dominic,
how you doing? Okay.
What's up, Mr. Reggie?
Okay. So you are more?
No, I would say I'm under the Israelite belief for sure.
Okay, so in the story from something more historical, the Meshi or the Moabite, so you have those groups of people fighting the Omnis, right? So
I thought, Reggie, you had a question, to be honest.
Yeah, Reggie, come on, because this day show, Reggie. This day show.
Yeah, I asked who was Hakma. You didn't know.
Well,
you are Hebrew. You say wisdom.
Reggie.
You speak the English.
First of all, calm down, Reggie. You're trying to make a point here that you don't have. When you say
no, I have a major point, and then because I want to see.
Hold on,
Reggie. It's okay.
Reggie.
It's okay, Reggie. I'm going to let. Trust me. I'm going to let you live.
See, this is the problem.
Hold on, Reggie.
This is the problem. When they talk to us, they all affirmative with their damn beliefs, and then when they talk to Edward Dodge, they're all passive and asking questions and actually trying to learn.
Do you see his disposition versus yours? Yours.
Oh, my disposition with you is always the same. You call me an idiot. I started
okay, then. So we'll keep it there. It has nothing to do with Mr. Dodge. Okay, so let's deal with that. Me and you.
I'm not dealing with him. I'm dealing with your belief.
So Reggie, let me answer your question, right? You asked me who is Hagma. You said, who is she?
Yes.
Right? There is no female deity called Hagma in the biblical text. Now, let's deal with this as it states, Reggie. If you say who is Hagma and you reference her as a she, that's false, Reggie. There is no Israelite belief that worships Hagma, right? You're not going to show me that in the biblical narrative. If you're saying that that's my paradigm as a Hebrew Israelite, then stick with that, Reggie. In the Hebrew paradigm, there is no worship of wisdom. There is no worship of wisdom. Do you understand that, Reggie? Now, when you say wisdom, now hold on, Reggie. When you say
wisdom, you're being affirmative to me, and I'm saying, I'm not
Reggie, one at a time. One mic.
When you say wisdom is a she, you're talking about the Hebrew language. It's both masculine and feminine. So when you look at it, it'll refer to it in the feminine, but it's not talking about a gender. It's not being genderized, Reggie. That's why I said your question is misleading. So it's not a she in the terms of genitalia or this is a feminine aspect. That's only dealing with the language.
All right, I'd like to add something here. I think you guys both are making a partial point here. Reggie's right when wisdom is she, but Yarah is also correct that she is not a goddess, because part of my argument, a big part of my argument, is that King Solomon is the conduit by which they take the parts of the goddess traditions that they like wisdom, Sophia, and they channel it through King Solomon, while at the same time they have an entirely massive theological agenda to eliminate goddesses as a concept. So there's not a word for goddess in the Hebrew language at all. Right. It's only Elohim, which is plural of male, and there is no word for goddess, period. So they do have the Sophia, and that becomes the Shekinah and the Kabbalist tradition. So like that feminine, the Christians will say the Holy Ghost is feminine. So the feminine is still there because they could never eliminate it altogether. And plus there's parts of it that they like the Song of Songs is totally from these old Astarte, whether it's an old or later text, it's inspired by these old Astarte liturgies of the love goddess. But they channel it into a way that makes it acceptable within the patriarchal framework, taking the bits that they like and getting rid of the bits that they don't like. And part of what they don't like is the concept of goddess. So they keep the Sophia, but they eliminate the concept of a female deity. So you guys are both making half the point. And
well, so, Edward, I don't disagree with you on that, but I am talking to my Hebrew Israelite brother. So in Job 28:12-13, it was God who found wisdom, right? And gave her to Israel. He found out a way, he found out all the way of knowledge and has given it unto Jacob his servant and to Israel his beloved. Afterwards did he shew himself upon earth and converse with men. As a female figure, right? Wisdom addressed human beings. Proverbs 1:22-33, inviting to her feast those who are not yet wise.
So I was with Yahweh when he laid the stones of creation. I don't have the quote in front of me. So there is these vestiges of her being a goddess, but clearly, in terms of the formal tradition, she's not a goddess.
Well, that's
vestiges.
fine, Edward. I don't disagree with you, right? Your work is actually your work. So we are trying to trace out where they take out the female God concepts. But obviously, she for the believers of the book, but not the Christians, because they don't really read the read the Hebrew. That's why they didn't know who Hakma was.
For 1 minute, Reggie. Stop for 1 minute. You heard what you just said? That they take out the God says the concept, right? You said that.
Yes, that's what.
How did you let my brother Elder Yarah get away with that? It went over your head. I guess I be catching all the small things. Elder Yarah said that in the Hebrew tradition, in the Hebrew faith, that there is no such thing as worshiping the woman, the female. How did that go over your head? See, where is in the Kemet teachings, and even in the teachings of the day, we worship our mother. We sit on the throne with our mother, bro. We sit there and practice and learn and allow our women to speak and to teach. But you said, Yarah, I don't know if it's a mistake. I'm going to give you a chance to take this back now because this is going all over the world. You said that there is no concept of worshiping the woman deity, brother. Did you mean to say that, or I'm going to let you clean that up, brother?
I mean, I said it. I said it very clear and concise. There is
I agree with him.
Conceptualization of that in the Hebrew Bible.
I 100% agree with Yarah on that. I think it's a huge part of their agenda is to get rid of the goddess. Like, it's not by accident; it's an agenda.
It's a male-loving cult.
But that's even worse, though. It was on your part. That's even worse.
Yeah, because I think in the first temple they are worshiping the feminine, and it's not till the second temple when they get rid of her.
Yes,
right. Like I said, I don't know where Reggie has been most of the conversation, but we talked early on about Israelites having a contention in Jesus' highest reform about them worshiping Asherah within the temple. They had an Asherah.
They made her a harlot. I heard all of that.
So the reform was.
Let him finish, Reggie. Let him finish.
So part of the reform was that the scripture tells us that wisdom searches the deep things of the Most High. That's a verse of scripture. So, but when we're talking about the actual language of it, there is a feminine and a masculine cognate in understanding to the Hebrew language. And so oftentimes when you're reading, that's what you see. It's not necessarily genderizing these different things. And so I don't know why that's so difficult for Reggie to understand. I even talked about the Ruach Elohim, right? Some refer to as the Ruach HaKodesh. That's a derivation from the Akkadian deity Katesh, which is a feminine aspect of a feminine deity. I stated that early on in this conversation. So I don't really understand where you
don't want to understand.
No, I don't want to understand.
You don't want to understand.
Where your question is misleading. When you say, do we worship? How come we don't worship Hagma? Do we worship Hagma?
I didn't ask you that. You
didn't ask me that.
Can I speak, Sonetta? I was clear. I just asked, who is Hagma? Right? That's because I wanted to talk about another woman, female figure, right? That Hebrews and Israelites or Christians take out to deal with how the world worshiped at one time, and then there was a drastic change. Then you say that she is not worshipped, right? But in Wisdom 7:25-7, Solomon, as the archetypical wise person, fell in love with. Now they use the word wisdom, which is.
What are you reading? What are you reading from? May I ask?
I'm reading from my notes.
What are you gleaning that from? What is your source on that?
Well, this particular source, it's parts of the Hebrew Bible. So Proverbs, and then there is another section of another book called Seer, right? And then then from that there is a section called Wisdom.
So you're
right?
reading from Apocrypha text, except for Proverbs, but Proverbs refers to wisdom in the feminine aspect, not as a deity.
Yeah.
Not in the book of Proverbs.
Yeah. So
but wisdom and seer are apocryphal books, or books that I don't study because I don't consider them to be canon. I don't consider them to be books that are good for study.
Okay. Well,
I view them as dime store novels.
You do.
Fill in the
But
blanks.
we also, okay, so is history a dime store novel?
Pardon me?
Is history a dime store novel?
I don't understand that question.
So would you
the book of wisdom is not history.
Would you accept? Wait, hold on, huh? Wait, or you even when you're talking about the Bible, actually even in this time period that you're talking about, the time period of the Exodus, are you talking about history, or are you talking about a dime store novel?
No, I'm speaking about history when I talk about the Exodus.
Novel.
I'm speaking about history because I can go into Manfred Betek's work and the work that he did in the virus. I can talk about that. I can talk about Ted Kennedy, and a PhD scholar, and his work that he's done also in regards to the Exodus. I can talk about Scott Stripling, who's an epigraphist and an archaeologist who's done work in regards to the Exodus. I can refer to a lot of PhD scholars who support the biblical narrative when it talks about the Exodus to a degree. Now, if you want to have a different argument, which I think you're trying to have with me, we can do that. But no, that's why I don't consider the Exodus to be a dime store novel. Now, based on the timeline, different chronologies, if you want to argue that, Stele, some have argued, just like we talked about earlier on this panel, some believe is a direct allusion to a direct simulation of the Exodus, right? So, I mean, we could talk about that. There's different arguments about cultural memories and other different.
There's different arguments. I'm talking to a believer.
But I'm
talking to a believer.
Yes.
I don't want to. I want you to give me. So what is Edward Dodge asked you, when did you say that the Exodus took place? And you're pushing it down to the period of Akhenaten. I've heard a lot of stuff.
I never did that.
Yarah is somehow connected to Ra. Well,
no,
okay, so when is the Exodus?
No, I never.
When is your dime store? When is your dime store story actually occurred?
No, I never did that.
Yeah, I want to hear from Rob Bourne real quick.
Yeah, but he asked me. But let me say this. He asked me about.
So I'm out. It was a pleasure. It's just interesting how when other people come on, like from out of our community, all of a sudden we're all passive and we're student and we're looking for an agreement, right? But when they talk to us, they're so authoritative about their dime store book. And
because
then
you're arguing dogma and not academics and history.
It occurs to
That's
me.
A different conversation.
It occurs to me that
hold up. Hey, Reggie.
Yes.
Reggie.
Don't start nothing. It won't be nothing.
Hey, Reggie, before you go, I want to tell you that there is some type of worship with the women. We see that with Jacob's mother. You hear me, Mr. Reggie? We see that with Jacob's mother. That is a form of worship because Jacob's mother gave him the decree to go against his own father. So we do see a form of type of worship.
All right,
I don't disagree with you. I'm just listening to what Yarah says when I ask him questions about Hakma, and then he doesn't, and then all of a sudden it doesn't.
Yeah, compute. Because the context you should have given it, Reggie, is what is Hagma versus what is she.
Don't go nowhere, Reggie. Don't go nowhere yet.
That's different.
Don't go nowhere. Let me bring on Rob Bourne. Let's see what Rob Bourne got. Rob Bourne, don't come with no foolishness, brother. Just add on to the bill, brother. Please, man.
I know you don't want me to kill Kemet. It's okay. I won't kill Kemet today.
Nah, you can kill Kemet, but just don't come in with the crazy.
I'll let you live, man. I don't come in with crazy. How y'all doing today, man?
Good, man. Good.
Mr. Dodge, I got a question for you. Are you familiar with the Kunlet inscription
of Yahweh and his Asherah, the Kunlet Arjun, that one?
Yes, yes. So
yeah, of course, sure.
based off of that, outside of the Bible source, did Yahweh have a wife?
Oh well, yeah, of course. Yeah, the triple goddess Asherah, start to Anat, they were being worshipped. At least briefly, he had to marry her long enough that he could divorce her. So at least for a while there, they were married.
So something happened when they took Yahweh's wife out the game. Something happened.
What's wrong with your sound? Your sound is crazy a little bit.
What do you mean? It sound crazy?
Yeah, we can hear you, but it's got.
Let me turn it up. It's all the way up.
No, don't turn it up.
Even turn it down.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, so I said
it just don't have no bass in it. It's like real.
Oh, yeah, I'm on this computer, man. I should have stayed on the phone.
Yeah,
but it's all right. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's interesting. My next question: Where does Yahweh specifically come from, according to the text? Like where is he from?
Well, Moses meets him in Midian, according to by the biblical narrative, and there's archaeology that would the Chemite hypothesis the Yarah is talking about, I think, supports it that Yahweh came from the south, south of Israel, generally speaking.
Okay, that's really it. I got something I want to add on real quick. Yo, Saj, you can share my screen, brother?
Yep, let's go.
Are you familiar with the dictionary of deities?
I don't see no screen being shared, bro.
Doing it now. I say, are you familiar, brother, with the dictionary of deities and demons of the Bible?
I mean, I've read through those types of references.
Yeah, because you already named an important one, the Kenite. That's really important right there. So I'm gonna put this one up here real quick. All right. So this right here is on the screen now. This is dealing with Yahweh, right? And I think this is interesting. I'm just gonna put this here. You tell me what you think about it. It says the code of Yahweh is not originally at home in Palestine. So it ain't from Israel. It says outside Israel. Yahweh was not worshipped in the West Semitic world, despite affirmations to the contrary. So we have this source here. It says before 1200 BCE, the name Yahweh is not found in any Semitic text. The stir caused by Pentiano, Ebla, and the Bible, we all know that, where he made all of those wild claims about Abraham and that. We know that's not true now. Who claim to have found the shortened form of the name Yahweh, Yah, as a divine element or theophoric names from Ebla. So we know that's not there. So I just thought that part is interesting. And I want one more here where they're telling you it's not known in the Ugarit, but it's interesting when we see this outside of there in the Egyptian text. So like you just said, it says the absence of reference to Syrian or Palestinian code of Yahweh outside Israel suggests that the God does not belong to the traditional cycle of West Semitic deities. The origin of his veneration must be sought elsewhere. A number of texts suggest that Yahweh was worshipped in the southern Edom. So I like to say that Yahweh is an Edomite God, and a Midian before his cult spread to Palestine. Now this is the interesting, then I'm gonna stop here and you tell me what you think about this. It says, let me blow it up a little more. It says there are 2 Egyptian texts that mention Yahweh. In these texts from the 14th to 13th century, Yahweh is neither connected with Israelites. So we clear here. In the earliest text before we have a Bible, Yahweh is not connected with the Israelites, nor is his cult located in Palestine. The texts speak about Yahu in the land of the Shashu Bedouins. The one text is from the region of Amenhotep III, and the other from the reign of Ramses II, and the report of those activations. Anyway, in the Ramses II list, the name occurs in a context which also mentions Seir. So I'm bringing this up because this is why I'm going to stop, where it talks about Yahweh comes from Sirah or Tira, etc., right, in the Bible. It says it may be tentatively concluded that Yahweh in the land of the Shashu Bedouins is to be situated in the area of Edom. So I'll stop there, but I think Yahweh is an Edomite God.
Yeah, it says for the record, it says Edom and Midian there at the last line.
It does. Yeah, it does.
But yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I follow the academic consensus on the dating and the archaeology. So my work tracks with that.
So is the Canaanite hypothesis still strong, or is it gone?
Isn't this what you're describing right here? That
just the Canaanite, the Canaanite hypothesis.
maybe I'm wrong with the Canaanite hypothesis. I thought that what you're reading right there was the Canaanite hypothesis. So
Yeah,
maybe I'm wrong.
No, it's right here. The Canaanite is right here. So it says the strength of the Canaanite hypothesis is the link of the fathers between different but convergent. This is just dealing with it coming from Edom and that Midian part that you're talking about, not the Egyptian part though. So I think I don't know if something new came out. So I wanted to ask you about it since this is your field.
A major flaw is its disregard for the Canaanite origins.
No, I agree with this, Kenite. Yeah, I don't think Yahweh comes from Canaan. I think Yahweh comes from the south, and that it comes in the context of the Bronze Age collapse that sets the stage for all this, craziness and migrations and people moving around and new people groups setting up shop, and for the breakdown of Egyptian authority in Canaan. So I think all that happens around the Bronze Age collapse, around 1200 BC.
Right. So who do you think? Who are the people who take on this new God? Who are those people? Because
I think there's a genuine slave escape out of. I think there are Canaanite slaves in Egypt, in the towns that are listed in the Bible, and that there's a genuine slave escape. Like the entire town, it's not 600,000 people, but like maybe 6,000. It's a big enough number to be notable. And they, stuff's getting crazy. It's a Bronze Age collapse. There's wars going on. And they take advantage of the situation to flee to the desert. And they get chased by the Egyptian army, but they manage to escape. And it's a pretty kind of a mundane story to a certain extent when you strip out all the supernatural. But I think it's perfectly reasonable. And then those guys, they're either worshiping Yahweh in Egypt or while they're wandering around the desert, they pick it up. It's maybe they're already worshiping him in Egypt. I don't know. I don't really know. It's all pretty murky, but I think the evidence for a slave escape without supernatural elements is perfectly reasonable.
Wait. Okay. So, since you are talking about Egypt, at this time period, Egypt's oldest enemy were the so-called Libyans, the Meshwesh and the Chitino, and those in the Tamhu, right? And to me, the more probable story is that groups of Libyans were able to capture the Delta region, because they were always trying to do that. Right. It is a possibility that they may have had a confederation with people that had come from the Levant sometime in the past, not necessarily recent, right? And the more probable thing is that when they lost the Libyans and their confederations, they went back to North Africa instead of going across the land bridge, because at that time there were Egyptian troops across. Canaan was their part of their vassals.
Right.
So it's very difficult for me to see them running right into the Egyptians.
Oh, no, they flee into the desert because they can't go into Canaan. That's why they stay in the desert until 1177, when the next big war happens with the Sea Peoples, and that's when the Sea Peoples settle on what we call the Gaza Strip as the Philistines, and that's when the Edomites and these other kingdoms really come on the map, is after Egyptian power breaks down after 1177. So if you go 1209 to 1177, that's 32 years. They say in the Bible it's 40 years. I think 32 is close enough to 40 for literature's sake. So I think they're wandering in the desert for those 32 years.
Now, which desert are you talking about? You're talking about the Eastern Desert, or you're talking about in the Sinai Desert.
Yeah,
that they're wandering, and
like
so
Bedouins, right?
Right. So the evidence of this large population,
not 600,000, not 2 million, but like a big enough number, like 6. I always drop 2 numbers off.
That's fine. I mean, you're being reasonable. My problem is we have a religious Hebrew Israelite on, and he's not objecting to any of this stuff.
Well, you're not asking me. You're addressing one person.
He and I are actually going to have a debate over exactly this, because we have different dating. And so I'm going to give my dating, and he's going to give his dating. And I think this is going to be the essence of our. Because there's a lot that you and I can agree on, but we definitely disagree on the dating of the Exodus. So I think this will be a very
Right. I just want him to, well, basically with that narrative that I gave and they was wandering into desert, his narrative, okay, let me hear, what is your narrative? Brother Yarah, what is your narrative of the Exodus?
My narrative of the Exodus is this: is that we see after almost the first drives out the what we would call the Hyksos rulers, right?
Yeah.
He drives them out around 1600 or so BCE. And then afterwards, we know, again, as I made references earlier through Manfred Bietek's work, we see that there is a group that is left there in Avaris, right? There's a group that yet remains there. So after that first group is ran out by almost the Hyksos, they ran up into the areas called Shahurim is one of the areas that they're pushed up into. Mm-hmm. But there's a group that remains down in Avaris, and so then I see around 1446, at around the time of Hatshepsut, we clearly see that there is another group that actually comes out of there. Now, if you go into if you go into other narratives, they'll tell you basically 1446 BCE is right one of the standard chronologies. If you start the dating back at the time that Solomon builds his temple, and if you date back according to the biblical narrative, that runs you all the way back to 1446 BCE for the biblical narrative.
So when do you think King David took Jerusalem?
I think King David took Jerusalem, the city of Jebus. I think he took it over from the Canaanites. I would say probably around 1000. Between circle 1000.
Yeah, no, that's what I think, like 1004, something like that, 1004, 1006, something like that. All right. I mean, the problem with your dating, if you put the Exodus at 1446, and the conquest comes thickly in the moment when Egypt is still firmly ruling Canaan. Egypt's ruling Canaan until 1177. Like it's not even a dispute that they've got firm control over Canaan. So I just don't think you can place the conquest prior to 1177. But if you place it at 1177, then the stories don't necessarily again have to be literally true. But the idea that there was a ton of fighting going on that they survived and won that spawned all these legends because it's an illiterate time period. So it's all oral tradition anyway. I think you can really make the case that they're fighting after 1177 and that there's, chaos. Literally, it's chaos in Canaan because it's a total breakdown of governmental authority. And it's like a civilizational collapse. And you can put the judges and the conquest in that historical conquest context very easily. And I think it makes perfect historical sense.
So I think that most scholars actually attempt to do that, but without taking into the biblical narratives account, like I said, of when Solomon's temple was built. And if we actually go by that term, I think we go back 300 some odd years. That places at a particular period of time. But then once we get into the Amana,
no one has evidence for when even the first temple, because no one's excavated. They don't excavate the Temple Mount, so except for limited amounts. So we don't have good evidence.
Right, we don't have good evidence for that at all. I agree with that. But if we go into the Amana letters, and we clearly start to see the exchanges during that particular time with the vassalage of Canaan, still with Egypt, we still start to see where they're talking about. Where they're still talking about these invaders and these marauders, people that they call the Iberu, the Haparu, and I was telling people that actually equates. There's a source in if those who take the Encyclopedia Britannica, they'll show you the connection between the Iberu and the Haparu and the Hebrew. They'll talk about those people who they call murderers and wanderers and people who they didn't want, the unseemly types they didn't want overrunning that land, right? And so to place all those people there, I think again, you start to see. For me, I think I have to go with sort of that middle chronology. I just don't think we have enough, especially when we get to Merneptah Stele. And I know a lot of people like to put their pen on their hat there, but I think the Merneptah Stele is possibly just a retelling of an earlier version of something that occurred.
You're talking about the Maripatah?
Yeah, Maripatah. I say Merneptah. Maripatah. I say Merneptah. But yeah, around that's where people put the dating of maybe Israel being named there. So that's where most modern scholars use that as a linchpin for dealing with a circa 1200 or so, 1250 or so BCE Exodus, if it occurred. But I think
you said if it occurred. If it occurred then, because you know,
if it occurred then, I believe it occurred 1446.
So during the now here's a problem. Just a couple of little problems with that time period, right? Besides the Hekakasu, or just means foreign rulers, right? And the foreign rulers are believing in African gods. They are writing the Meta Neter, right? So they're actually believing. So if they go into Canaan at that time period, as with the biblical Moses and all this stuff like that, all of this stuff is immediately forgotten when they're in the wilderness. It's immediately forgotten. So you would see them still writing, because that's what those people were actually writing. So we have we have those kings, and they all have Egyptian names, and then they go into another country and they just forget about all of that.
No, those, as I stated earlier,
Yeah.
when you see Amos force out that Hyksos group, those Hyksos rulers, one of the areas that we see inundated is an area called Shahurim, right? And we clearly see them still paying homage to we still them after a while become a vassalage. We still see them in those areas. They're up in those Jordanian hills. They're stepping up in the areas. But as we go to Manfred Betek's excavations, he clearly shows that even after almost the first campaign pushing those out, that there is a group of Bedouins. There is a group, much smaller group that remains in the area of Avaris.
No, I don't have a problem with that.
And so I believe that it is that group that is the Israelite Exodus.
Okay. So now the problem is that Amos, that was the first leg of them leaving, but Amenemhat is still fighting the Hekakasu. Sinwar Set is definitely still fighting the Hekakasu, all the way down to Hatshepsut is still fighting the Hekakasu,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
So this thing is trying to mesh the biblical narrative with history. It really doesn't seem to be working. It'd be better to look at history and rule those things out, and to continue using these concepts of the Bible and trying to prove them. Yarah?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think when we get into the biblical narratives and we get into the actual story of Moses, I think that that's the queen that he's dealing with. I think he's dealing with the one that he's given to when he comes out of the bull, or is taken out of the bulwarks. I think it's Hatshepsut that he's dealing with. Dealing with and erasing him.
But this will help me out, Yarah. Is Moses a Elohist or a Yahwehist?
You said what?
Is he an Elohist or a Yahwehist?
Who?
Moses.
He's both.
Okay. I know he cries to El, right?
Yes.
When he was supposed to be circumcised.
Why are you talking about this person like it's a historical person? There's no Moses.
No, I'm talking to him. No, I'm talking to him, Rob Bourne, because I need him to make his story true. So I asked him, well, is this person that is in their book, which I don't believe, right? Is he an Elohist or a Yahwehist? And that goes, now you may not like the question that I'm asking him, but I know why. If you want to ask him another question, that's fine. So you say that
good, bro. I just want to just throw that out there. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you say that he's both.
Yes.
How is he? How could you be both a Elohist and a Yahwehist?
Because
That's
they're the same.
Oh no, El is the top of the pantheon, right? There's all these other groups of people underneath them. Baal, there's a whole pantheon. Yahweh is just the Lord of the land of Israel,
But
right?
you speak no. What you're doing is that you're speaking specifically of a Canaanite pantheon. I don't believe Moses is of a Canaanite pantheon, and so when I say he's both, they're dealing with their understanding of Yahweh as he's revealed in the biblical narrative as Yahweh El. We see that in Genesis chapter 18.
You
We see
keep
that
giving
throughout
me,
the scripture. We
yeah,
see
you
a
keep
scripture
giving
that
me.
we
Are we
see both.
talking?
Hold on. We see both. Hold on. If most biblical scholars, let's deal with that. If most biblical scholars attribute the Torah writing or the scribing of the scribing to Moses, he's using both Yahweh and El. But if you argue against it now, if you want to argue the documentary hypothesis again and talk about whether or not there's Yahweh is writing or there's Elohist writing, they're both writing and saying that Moses is agreeing that the God of Israel is both El and Yahweh. We see them both in the book of Genesis. We see both the term El and Yahweh used for the exact same deity being
But they're
attributed.
not.
But you're saying that.
Yeah,
You're
but they're
saying that.
in
You're saying
history
that. But
they're
the
not
Bible,
because
you're arguing against the biblical narrative. The biblical narrative doesn't agree with what you're saying.
you are arguing against. I'll get off. You're arguing against a bigger biblical narrative because you was talking about the Eucharistic groups, right? You was talking about the Akkadian groups. You're the one who is so confusing because
We
then you
know that
don't really.
we know that they're connected to the Akkadians, though. We know that's their lineage, though. Like we know that I talked about there's a linguistic study that connects the Akkadian language to the Hebrew, to the Paleo Hebrew, and now even to the Hebrew.
No,
So,
no, but the
yes.
problem is these groups are in so they find themselves in Egypt. They're not part of that group. They're isolated from those
No,
groups
they're
until they get to
not. They're
Canaan.
not isolated. No, they're not isolated. That's incorrect. And
Yes,
that's
they
why I talked about. Hold on. That's why I talked
In
about in
Egyptian
7. Hold
lore.
on. This is why I talked about in 720 BCE, before the Assyrians come in and conquer Jerusalem. There's a revolt uprising right before Hezekiah takes control. There's a revolt or uprising, and one of the people that is an Israelite is his name is Yahubidi. I can't remember his name right now. Is Yahubidi, but there's some attestations that his name is Ilu or Ilu. We know that comes from the Akkadian reference. So we see Israelites still using Akkadian references for the name of God.
Right, but they don't believe in your God.
That's the same deity.
No, they don't believe in your customs.
Who doesn't? What are you talking about?
All right, brothers.
I want to ask this question. He said they don't believe in our customs.
I'm
They
going to
were
allow Yarah and
henotheists.
Edward to close us out of here, man.
They had many different customs. What you talking about?
I'm going to allow y'all two to close us out. Rob Bourne, you got anything else you want to say before we close out? All right, Rob Bourne don't got nothing else to say.
Yeah, I'll take Rob Bourne, though. That Canaanite hypothesis is dead, has long been dead. I'll argue that against the Kenite hypothesis any day. Actually, you just really proved it in the literature you just read.
All right, go ahead, close us out, Yarah, and let us know where y'all two differ at. So when y'all come back again, y'all be able to show what y'all gonna show.
I'll finish up here. I also want to thank you guys. Thank you, Sonetter. Thank you, Yarah. I really look forward to our ongoing conversation. Thanks to everybody else that jumped in, to Reggie and everybody else that jumped in. It's been another great conversation here. So Yarah and I definitely disagree on the dating. So and we disagree on whether I'm going to continue to make the claim that El is still his own God, and that the Yahwists, I agree that Yahwists are infusing Yahweh with the powers of El, but that they start out very different, and that fusion takes the whole of the first temple to play out. And it's only by the second temple when they are really truly fused together. That's my position. And but yeah, I think that there's Yeah, and so we're going to come sometime in January. We'll come with slide decks and evidence, and we'll make the case.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So thank you.
No,
And
that's perfect.
I'm good.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed the bill and definitely enjoyed the conversation. And again, we definitely disagree on the dating of the Exodus. We could definitely go into that, in regards to different chronologies that are out there. And we can also talk about the continuity between El and Yahweh. I think it's consistent. I think it's constant. And I think that's something we definitely could have a good discussion on.
Sometime in January, early January. Let's make it happen.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Yarah, I need you to text me your topic, brother. You got to text me your topic. Let me run down the list. Make sure y'all get y'all tickets for Brother Jabari, Richard Carrier. We got Zion Lex coming up February the 3rd. All right, who are the biblical Israelites of today? Right after that, we got Naphtali, February the 6th, Age of the Earth, man evolved from apes. So that's what she's going to be discussing. She don't agree with that. And then we got February the 13th, the ancient wisdom of stars, alignments, and black holes. Dulcinea will be going in. Right after that, the list is fluent, so it might be some people in between them. All right? Because we're trying to cover the month of February. All right. And then we got Bobby Banger, man. Y'all already know February the 17th. Understand Black Egypt through the eyes of evolutionary science. Oh, man, that's going to be great. Then we got the Captain to Zoriak coming in. Month of February going to be lit up, y'all. If y'all want to get in, email me, text me your title so we can get ahead in, and we just going to do it up, man. All right? Never been done before on Sarnetta Studios. We're going to do it this time. Jesus has to be the son of Joseph according to biblical prophecy. That's what Captain Tazariak will be coming with February the 21st. And I'm waiting on Elder Yarah topic with it, whatever he want to discuss. So peace and blessings. Thank you. Appreciate it. Talk to y'all later, man. We out. Y'all can go ahead and leave. We out.
All right.
Click out.
We're out here?
Yeah. Y'all can click out.
All right. Bye, guys.
All
Talk
right.
to you later.
Well, peace.
Yara. Thank you, Sonetter. Talk to you
Peace.
later.
All right. Now, family, you already know. Get your tickets. Going down. Last of the Mohegans. Going down. 35 seats left. I know I'm going to have to get another 50 like we do. Get 50 more. And then sell them back. Sell them back if I have extra seats. All right. Get your tickets now. Don't wait till the last minute. It's going down. It's going down. This Saturday, no holds barred is going down. Jabari will be in the ring with a formidable opponent. Y'all see the link? Put that link for the tickets in the chat, y'all. We need that link up in the chat. Y'all know what it is. Get that link there in case people want to get their tickets now. All right? In case they want to get their tickets now.
You fail to realize you dealing with the prince of this shit. You dealing with King Kong consciousness right here, bitch. It's the whole
Yeah, who that you that say that's on TV? Big dog, he the voice of the streets. There's too much killing in the hood, why they creeps out the violence? Look at your little kids, how you say that's not your problem? Yeah, we gon' debate after that. What, wait, teach these brothers that they kings, maybe they won't have to dream. It's a new day, a new era. Time to fall in love with that black that you see up in that mirror, nigga. Peace and love, unity and power, but sit your ass down, it's for the scholars. Minute after minute, hour after hour, let me shout out my YAHWH. You can shout out what you lean on. We going live, bring your screen on. Grab a seat, get this knowledge when the team on. Better pay attention before you end up in detention. Let me mention who it be inside that a TV. Black peace, black love, black power, inside that a TV. We can reach the world of power inside that a TV. We can do it. If we each show up, what's stopping inside that a TV? Now you see, yeah, inside that a TV. I don't hate you, black man, I just just hate you cause you hate me. And I ain't did you nothing, but you looking all shady. Maybe it's Mercedes or that Beamer in the driveway. Maybe I can show you how to get that but you sideways. Tuning on that YouTube side net of TV. Yeah, we cooking in the kitchen, but it's no pig feet. I can give you a million years, but you can't beat me. You should try to be yourself, we can show you all the steps. What's your name? Where you calling from? Who on the line? Open up, what you calling for? What's on your mind? Dig up in that bag and drop a jewel for your people. Exposing all evil on side net of TV. Black Paul, side net of TV. We can reach the world apart on side net of TV. If we each show up, what's stopping side net of TV? Now you can see, yeah, on side net of TV.
I'm gonna do you a favor, my brother. I'm gonna leave it to you because I it's out of my mouth. But it goes out of my mouth. And I still think I literally articulate this. But the stuff that this man has done.
This is exactly what I've been waiting for. This is exactly, I don't mean to sound like Cat Williams, but this is exactly what I've been waiting for.